Now we come to the first turn. Here we go.
Dave and I go one way, and the drinks go the other.
I'm thirsty, I mean... Dave? Saw my drink's gone. No big surprise. OK, but in the interest of science, we must dot the I's and cross the T's. We all know the feeling, if you've ever been around any sort of corner, you feel you're being pushed to the side. It's called centrifugal force, and basically it's because your body as an object, wants to carry on going in a straight line, but the car, or bike, is pulling you that way. So relative to it, you feel a force throwing you that way.
And centrifugal force can have deadly consequences. In Osaka in 2005, a commuter train took a bend too fast and flew. 107 people died. Thankfully, derailment is rare, but tight bends and high speeds produce strong centrifugal forces. Bullet train engineers didn't want to slow the trains down. To get round, they turned to some of the very first wheeled vehicles. Chariots. Ancient charioteers knew how to corner quickly without flying off track. So did their modern counterparts. This is a modern chariot, a scurry. Jeff is our Ben-Hur, and these are his ponies, Zig and Zag.
So what am I going to do?
What you'll do, you're going to keep the car stable.
I thought I was just sitting a bit of passenger. I was going to bring a book.
No, you're not going to read a book. You're going to lean this way and lean that way.
So if I get it wrong,
we'll roll over.
These modern charioteers race around twisted courses with lots of cornering. And to keep the scurry stable, usually Alison sits on the back and leans into the turns. But today, I'm doing it. No pressure then.
Never let go. For pony trips, you'll be straight out the back.
Bad. So, 1, 2, lean. 1, 2, lean, and I lean the way
as
and
far
then
as
into
you
the
can.
turn as far as I can
Yeah.
get.
If the wheel starts coming off the ground, you lean further.
Right. So, after that, frankly, terrifying briefing, we're off.
This is nice. I like this speed. This is fast enough.
Leaning into bends reduces the centrifugal force, pushes us outwards. This balances the carriage and allows Zig and Zag, like their ancient counterparts, to faster. It's a technique first recorded by ancient Greek author Homer in his epic account of the the Iliad.
Ancient charioteers couldn't possibly have known about the Newtonian laws of inertia and centrifugal force. How could they? They hadn't been invented yet. But somehow they instinctively knew that leaning helps you turn faster. I'm sure it looks lovely, but it's really frightening.
But what about my prototype mobile bar? To see if leaning is the key to success, I fired Dave and drafted in Frank.
So, I am going to try this again. I am determined to crack my motorcycle mobile refreshment system solution. And I'm going to use this, which is a rather different motorcycle and sidecar outfit, because this one tilts. I'm ready, sir.
This sidecar tilts instantly and effortlessly as it corners, keeping my drinks firmly in place.
That is astonishing!
Ben-Hur was clearly onto something, though I'm pretty sure he never foresaw its impact on mobile refresh systems.
Science works! Who'd have thought?
So, the more they lean, the less the force pushing outwards, i.e. cars, chariots. and trains. To make trains lean, banked, inclined into the bend. And that worked well for older, slower trains. But bullet trains are so fast, they need to lean even further into bends. Bullet train engineers didn't need to wait for reports from uncomfortable passengers to know that banking alone isn't enough. Every part of the bullet train experience is minutely tested, including cornering at high speed. This is the test train.
Right, this is odd. This is a simulator. Obviously, it's not as long as a river. Here we go. Chaps, fellow passengers. There. Let's see what happens.
This simulator can replicate sensations of the bullet train travelling at any speed on any kind of track. Day's experiment, cornering at nearly 300 kilometres an hour.
Right now, going in a straight line, and I'll admit I'm completely convinced, as far as I'm concerned, I'm in a high-speed train. And as we go into the bend, this has been set up to simulate just a banked track. Oh, I think it's starting to... Yeah, I can... Oh, yes, straight away. Yeah, I can feel that throwing me off to the right. So banking isn't enough. And you can't bank the track any more than this, because if you do, well, if a train has to stop at it one day, it might fall over.
Which is where Ben-Hur comes to the rescue. Computer-controlled airbags under each carriage make the entire bullet train lean. As it moves, each section of the N700, the latest bullet train, tilts independently at just the right time and by just the right amount.
On a real bullet train, the effect is quite noticeable. Or, in fact, it isn't. And that's kind of the point, isn't it? Because right now, judging by the blur through the windows, we're doing the kind of speeds that present a bit of a problem for my tea if there's controlled tilting taking place. In fact, I'm so confident I'm going topless. This would be potentially dangerous without a very clever train. And look at that, I mean, it's not going anywhere. What if Ben-Hur was coffee man? Nah, he was coffee, I'm sure of it.
Thanks to ancient charioteers, bullet trains are 20 kilometres an hour faster, keeping travellers right on time. So bullet trains stay on track, along straights and around bends, as long as the track itself stays in place. But you can't bank on that here.
All trains face a big problem in Japan. Earthquakes. This is one of the most earthquake-prone lands on the planet. And the problem could be much worse at higher speeds, because trains and passengers could potentially suffer much greater impacts. Keeping their high-speed trains to stay on track through an earthquake would be a particular challenge for the engineers.
Japan is struck by around 900 quakes a year. In 1995, a shock destroyed the city of Kobe, killing more than 6,000 people. And every 100 years or so, Tokyo has been shaken by an even more devastating quake.
And now they're braced for the next one, which on past form could happen any time. Of course, the thing that really worries railway engineers is the same earthquakes that topple tall and rip up roads can derail trains. So it's good to know that thanks to the electric telegraph, there is a system in place to protect passengers on the bullet train. And now I'm going to just read my earthquake instructions again, just to be sure. Seek shelter under a table. It's glass.
No table cable's going to protect you if the train you're on is derailed at nearly 300 kilometers an hour. Engineers needed advance warning of earthquakes to slow the trains. So they designed the world's first earthquake warning system. The idea was to alert engineers before a quake arrived. But in actual practice, this proves to be a problem. An earthquake warning system is really only as good as the tremor detectors or seismometers. To understand the problem, we need an earthquake. And back in England, you can wait all day for one to come along. But according to earthquake expert Hugh Hunt, a lake and a large weight will replicate the key components of a seismic shock. And a precarious tower of blocks will play the part of its potential victim.
Right, Hugh, we've assembled everything you asked for. We're in a boat on a small lake, and over there is a digger with a big weight in it. How's this an earthquake?
Well, simulate an earthquake by dropping this lump of metal into the water, and it's going to create a wave. And in an earthquake, you've got waves in the ground.
Hugh has set up a system to warn me of the quake before it strikes, so I can try to protect the tower. It all depends on this.
That thing there is a seismometer. It measures motion.
Hugh's seismometer should detect the quake and trigger a warning on his laptop.
So we have an earthquake detection system down there,
Yeah.
attached to my tower.
Yeah.
So it's going to know when there's an earthquake.
I'm going to use my earthquake detection system to tell you when you have to take action to protect the tower, right? So
This is my earthquake
That's the earthquake protection system. Richard, ready for an earthquake?
Yeah, I am, yeah.
Right, so I'm going to ignore the sound of a large weight dropping into the water 20 meters away from me. It won't move until Hugh's warning system detects the quake.
Okay, earthquake, go!
Any sign of an earthquake?
Yeah, there's something coming.
Right. Yeah. Do you see, the thing is...
You're too slow.
Well, I can't, my point. All you did was say there's an earthquake
You're
happening.
too slow.
But there was an earthquake, then it fell
Look,
over.
it went red here, okay?
But I was with my protection system,
Red.
I never used it.
Red means earthquake, Richard, and you were just too slow.
Yeah, clearly what we have there, then, is a problem.
Hugh's system only detects an earthquake when it's arrived. Not much advance warning, not much good. Luckily for bullet train protection, earthquakes are quite as sneaky as this. They actually announce their arrival with small, fast-moving waves.
And what they discovered back in 100 and something years ago, two waves, a primary wave, which they called the P wave, and a secondary wave, which they called the S wave.
The slower S are the destructive ones that topple cities and floating towers. They're what Hugh's seismometer detected, but too late to be a useful warning. The key to advance warning is to detect the faster P waves. Fortunately, P waves are much smaller than S waves. You need a more sensitive seismometer. And for them, you need electromagnets, first used in the electric telegraph way back in 1837.
This is a working model of a device that quite probably represents the very first use of electricity for, well, anything. And it's a machine used to communicate between railway stations. Central to it is electromagnetism.
Behind the metal needles are coils of wire. Passing a current through a coil turns it into an electromagnet, moves the needle. Reversing the current moves the needle in the opposite direction.
If I pass a current through the coil, the needle moves. If I switch it and pass the current the other way, the polarity switches, the other way. All they needed then was a map of letters, and you can point to them if I want to spell an H or an I or a K. If I want to do an E, point both needles.
Hasn't got all the letters. There are only 20 on here, so it's an early move of texting.
150 years later, the electric telegraph has made way for mobiles and the internet, but electromagnets are still very useful.
This isn't a telegraph machine, but obviously it's a crane, quite a big one. But the important bit is at the business end there, because it's an electromagnet. And there it goes doing. Basically, this is just a magnet that can be on, or at the touch of a button, off. Suddenly it's no longer a magnet. But it isn't always that simple, because it can be a question of degree. It can be powerful or less powerful.
You can vary this crane's lifting power. Small current, weak magnet, less lift. Up the current and you can shift large lumps of metal. But that's not all. Measure changes in electromagnetism very accurately, and knowing how much force is being used is protecting the bullet train, and I hope my tower, from earthquakes. Back on the lake, I'm going to update my earthquake warning system. This time, expert Sean Gosen is coming aboard with a sophisticated electromagnetic seismometer.
So, Sean, you came aboard bringing with you your posher piece of kit. What essentially is the difference? This is the real deal, isn't it?
Yes, it's much more sensitive.
Sean's seismometer uses electromagnets to detect tiny moves such as the pulses of P waves.
So will you be able to detect these finer P waves that Hugh singularly failed to do? Well, your earthquake warning system consisted of saying there's an earthquake and everything's fallen over.
Sean's seismometer is so sensitive it needs to be placed on the stable lake bed.
OK, well, if everybody's in the right place, we'll give this a go. I promise not to look up. I'll just wait until I get a warning from Sean.
We're both monitoring our system.
Yeah.
Are we ready for an earthquake? Go!
OK, Richard. OK, I've deployed my system. That is an early warning. Look at that. Oh.
Richard, here comes an earthquake!
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. We know there's an earthquake because everything's moving, but it's OK. I think my earthquake protection net has saved the day, and it was only able to do so because you could actually warn me there was an earthquake this time, rather than you could tell me there is one. And it's that difference, that it's just the fact that your system can detect those finer, smaller, different frequency waves.
Sean's system alerted me about 7 seconds before the quake arrived, an actual advance warning. And seismometers using magnets are also sensitive enough to protect the bullet train. The current system is the most sophisticated earthquake warning system in the world. About 70 linked seismometers along the track and nearby map seismic activity. 2 seconds after detecting P waves, power is switched off and any train in the danger zone automatically brakes. For vehicles with a stopping distance of just over 3 kilometers, every second counts. In a 2004 quake, the system in place successfully stopped 4 bullet trains. But a 5th was too close to the epicenter and became the only bullet train ever to be derailed. In a constant quest for perfection, engineers have since developed a cutting-edge anti-system. This is the Bullet Train Research Center. They don't let just anybody see their pioneering, and I'm shadowed at all times.
Ah, hello.
村松と申します。
Yes, hello.
今日よろしくお願いします。
Very nice to see you.
どうぞ。
Ah, right, sit down.
はい。
Okay, this is where I find out all about the
じゃ
place.
あ、
The engineers were keen to share the complicated earthquake science behind the system, but it's all Greek, well, Japanese to me.
プラスでもう一度揺らしてみます。映像を次にご覧いただきます。
Yeah, I should have brought a phrase book there. Fortunately, the lesson has a practical demonstration for underachieving students.
It's one of those simple but effective solutions. They've fitted an extra rail. In the event of a train being caught too close to the epicenter of an earthquake for the P-wave system to detect it and warn the driver in time to slow it down, this is here to keep everything on track.
Even when the ground moves violently, the wheels are held in place by the extra rails. As with every part of the bullet train, it's been exhaustively tested.
To find out if their idea worked, the engineers built, well, it's a model train set. Admittedly, the track doesn't go very far, but then it is built for a very specific purpose. This is a 1/5 scale replica of the real thing. And it has a feature that probably most model railway enthusiasts don't have on their set at home, an earthquake simulator.
The lip of the wheel sits between the two rails, so even the really violent tremors can't shake this train off track. The special rails are currently being introduced along sections of the line. It really is an astonishing train. Fast, earthquake-proof, always on time, and beautiful too. Bullet train engineers have moved technology pioneered in Britain 200 years ago into the 21st century.
Now, bullet train technology is being exported all over the world, even back to Britain. The bullet train really has led the way to a new global age of the train. China and America are committing to high-speed rail networks. And this remarkable, revolutionary train wouldn't have been possible without
Ancient chassis,
oh my God! A crowbar.
a medieval clock,
Oh, that really is moving. It's going to be uncomfortable, obviously.
a 19th century luxury car,
My wheels on my train just can't get enough grip to get moving.
and the electric telegraph.
Any sign of an earthquake?
Yeah, there's something.
This is one of the strangest places on Earth. It's the inside of a vast, sophisticated machine, which is driven by an ancient technology. A tanker with a cargo that can power London for about a week. A cargo equivalent to the energy of 55 nuclear bombs.
This huge ship is carrying liquefied natural gas, millions of litres of the stuff. At room temperature, it turns into a highly flammable gas. That's why people want it.
The liquid inside these tankers becomes gas for cooking and heat.
Creating the technology to transport it is very complex. Yet these ships owe their existence to some surprising connections.
Kitchen cutlery. The father of
And there it goes.
the world's first steam engine. World War II fire engines. And air-to-air refueling. Transporting natural gas around the planet is a business. This supertanker is larger than the Titanic and is designed to carry natural gas all over the globe.
She's a big ship, yeah, so you know everything about her is going to be super scale, but it's only when you get close up do you realise how big.
Admittedly, I'm not the tallest chap you'll meet. It would make even him feel small. The propeller alone is more than 5 times my height and weighs 48 tons. The whole ship is nearly 300 meters long, about 2.5 football pitches, and it takes a lot of looking after.
Every time she comes into dry dock like this, she's repainted. She is quite big, so it is quite a lot of paint. 12 tons of it gets applied.
I didn't come here simply to feel small. I can do that anywhere. I came here because I want to see how these ships shift huge quantities of gas all around the globe. They have vast tanks, but getting inside them is very tricky. The ships have to be in dry dock, and the tanks have to be completely purged of any trace of their hazardous cargo.
This is the inside of one of the tanks, and as far as we know, nobody's ever actually filmed inside one of these before. That seems a shame, because look at it. All you need is one light, one camera. You can make a sci-fi movie and listen to it.
That echo is real, analog, not a digital effect. Real sounds bouncing around this cavernous tank. There's room for 34 million litres of liquid gas in here. The equivalent volume of water would allow the average British home to flush the toilet for 1,200 years.
And there are 4 of these, each at 160 degrees inside. Just another world. It's just crazy.
Just like oil, natural gas is a fossil fuel found where ancient organisms decomposed. It can be shifted in pipelines, expensive and impractical for crossing oceans. Instead, engineers had to work out how to transport it by ship. That's a challenge when you remember that natural gas ignites at any air temperature found on Earth. To learn how you transport gas safely, a high-security research facility in northern England. This is a blast-proof chamber, a sort of industrial-scale oven.
Right, well, this device here is a supply of gas up through this tube. This is an igniter, it'll create a spark, light the gas, and it'll burn. It's quite a lot of gas, a lot more than you're used to at home, but don't worry, the place we're in can take it. This is a specialised blast testing facility. They use it to test industrial safety equipment on a massive scale, so it'll be okay. Nevertheless, I think I'll get out while we light it.
Since someone had left the oven door off, we had to retreat a safe distance. Cue the spark.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Release gas.
That's just a few litres of gas. Imagine a cargo of many millions of litres be ignited by the tiniest of sparks. cargo has the energy equivalent of 55 atomic bombs. Spilling it could be a massive disaster. But there has never been any major accident, and the ops plan to keep it that way. Fortunately, there's a simple solution. Turn the gas into a liquid. As a liquid, it can't catch fire. And what's more, it takes up much less space. If the cargo were in gas form, the tanker would need to be impossibly big.
It would have to be 600 times more voluminous, which would make it 10 times longer than this. 2,500 meters, a mile and a half.
To make the gas, you chill it to minus 162 degrees Celsius. That's nearly twice as cold as it ever gets in Antarctica. But it only has to warm a little bit to turn back into highly flammable gas. So the crew are ultra cautious with their volatile cargo. As I found out, I went on board a fully laden tanker.
As a liquid, it won't explode, nor will it burn. But the operators of LNG carriers can't take any chances with safety. So to avoid even the remotest risk igniting any gas vapor, electronic devices are not allowed anywhere near those tanks. If I want to go from here, the bridge at the stern, I can't even wear a microphone. So, it's got to go. There you go.
Now I take my telephone, my camera, and certainly not a TV crew beyond the bridge. They take no chances with this precious cargo. If you could hear me, I'd be saying that under my feet is a tank exactly the same as the one I climbed inside earlier. It's one of 4 full of ultra-cold liquid. That's an awful natural gas on these ships. Keeping it as super cold liquid is the first and best line of defense. But what if any of the cargo warmed up and turned back into gas? The consequences would be dire. So there is a second line of defense.
Normally the cargo is the other side of these walls. Tens of millions of litres of it. And remember, it's in liquid form. Expand it into gas, ready to use, and it's billions of litres. And if any of the liquid made its way and leaked out and turned back into vapour, well, that could be a big problem. But it, thanks to a pre-war mail plane.
In the 1930s, Empire delivered mail and passengers from Britain to Australia in 700-mile hops. They couldn't cross the Atlantic until they were able to take on fuel during flight. Nowadays, we take mid-air refueling for granted. But aviation fuel, just like natural gas, is flammable. A single spark when the refueling pipe makes contact and, well, it's kaboom.
What aviators needed was something to stop an explosion if there was a spark. What they needed, in fact, was noxious air. That's the name Daniel Rutherford gave nitrogen when he first isolated it in 1770. There might be lots of nitrogen around in the atmosphere, and there is a lot, but in its pure state, we can't breathe. Sadly, it took a dead mouse in the container of the stuff to make that particular scientific advance. But the point is, nitrogen is an inert gas. It doesn't react readily with anything at all. And more importantly, it stops fuel combining with oxygen. There's a spark. Ignition is impossible if there's enough nitrogen. Fires can't breathe nitrogen either. And that's a claim that just needs to be put to the test.
So, time to fire up the industrial oven once again. This time with nitrogen inside it. First, it's sealed. to contain the toxic gas safely. Nitrogen on. I get to watch from inside a special canopy to the side. A meter shows how the oxygen level drops as nitrogen replaces the normal air around the igniter. Remember, the theory is that gas won't burn unless there's enough oxygen present. 10 means there's hardly any oxygen in the chamber. It's now mostly nitrogen.
I know the science, I know the physics, I know the work, but suddenly I'm strangely nervous. Maybe it's just the drama of the surroundings. Right, if we're ready to do this, let's kill the nitrogen supply. OK, let's have these spun then, please. This is the igniter. No gas in there yet, remember. So very soon we'll see the sparks at the top of the funnel. Let's have a look. There they go, that's the spark. Smoke on them, please. Now, the smoke is purely an indicator here, because otherwise we won't be able to see when the gas starts flowing. Right now, no gas going in, you can see the smoke. As soon as the gas starts, it'll pull the smoke up.
The chamber is full of nitrogen. The spark is firing.
We can have the gas on then. And at that point, the only thing stopping ignition has to be the nitrogen. There goes the gas. Look at it, you can see where the smoke's coming out the top. That's been pulled through by the gas. That's the same gas we saw burning earlier, and yet with in there, look at that. Nothing. Do you know what? I find that strangely comforting. Science tells you it should work, but there it is working. Gas charging in now. The nitrogen quashing it. It can't ignite. It can't.
Nitrogen also protects gas tankers and mid-air refueling. A quick squirt of nitrogen down refueling pipes removes any explosion. Thanks to nitrogen, an Empire flying boat made its Atlantic flight back in 1938. On tankers, the potentially poisonous nitrogen is safely sealed inside the gas tank insulation. This thin layer of aluminium, almost foil, is the outermost skin. But obviously, if I were to poke my finger, it wouldn't go straight into a tank full of tens of millions of litres of liquefied natural gas. On the other side of the aluminium, there's a layer of insulation that's critically to keep the temperature low. Then there's the aluminium tank itself. But that layer of insulation is just about temperature. It's porous and it's been steeped in nitrogen. So if there is a problem in the tank, nothing can burn. There's no oxygen. It's inert. In case of a leak, nitrogen stops the volatile cargo reacting with oxygen, and the insulation keeps it in liquid form.
They're the world's biggest deep freezers, the equivalent of more than 300,000 domestic freezers like the one at home, and 10 times colder inside.
The gas is chilled on shore, and the liquid is then onto the tanker. But these super cold temperatures pose big engineering challenges. You can't just use standard steel pipes to do the job.
Moving the ultra-cold liquid around the ship and around the ship on pipes like these presented a whole new set of problems that could only be resolved by recourse to the engineering might of this, and of this, and even of this. But no, not actual cutlery, obviously. That'd take hours. No, what it's made of.
Stainless steel. 100 years ago, cutlery was made of other metals, silver, say, or plain steel for everyday tableware. But rusts, off-putting at dinner. And, like many materials, it changes completely when you put it in the deep, deep freeze.
Subantarctic temperatures are a game changer. Suddenly, strong things that you thought you could rely on, like metal, behave differently when you put them in the deep, deep freeze. It's all about ductile to brittle transition changes, which is how the properties of things change with temperature. An example, bread. At room temperature, a slice of bread is bendy, flexible, ductile in the jargon. Take the same piece, freeze it, it's harder, but brittle. Wouldn't it be terrible if steel behaved the same way? It does.
Jackie Butterfield, a materials specialist and steel consultant, introduced me to a medieval torture device.
This is the sort of equipment that we'd use to test the toughness of a metal.
Right, can I help?
Absolutely.
Oh, good. What'll I do?
First thing you can do is lift this weight up and we'll lock it in position.
Right, thank you. OK, I always get the nice jobs. Right, so just swing this back, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, it's got a lot of weight.
Just for the record, I'm not being a weakling. It is actually quite heavy, about 10 kilograms.
So it's a fitness program?
It is, absolutely.
Okay. Right, so that's... the weight is primed.
Yeah, so what this is going to do, this weight has potential energy.
So that's a measured dose of energy to the sample down there.
Absolutely.
It's the same each time because the weight is the same.
Step forward, victim number 1. A length of standard steel tube, just like a scaffold.
Triggering test. So this is going to return a specific amount of potential energy transferred into kinetic energy that will be absorbed all by the sample. OK, here we go. 3, 2, 1. It's not even dented it.
The full force of the weight slamming into it. At air temperature, the bog standard carbon steel remained undamaged, whilst the energy ricocheted through the frame around it.
So this sample has survived then?
Absolutely.
What are we doing here?
Right, what we need to do now is test some of the carbon steel at the cryogenic temperatures with the liquid nitrogen.
So this is where we introduce our tricky subantarctic...
Absolutely.
Cue liquid nitrogen, minus 195 degrees Celsius. This will give the steel the same kind of thermal shock as the chilled liquid natural gas going into the tanker.
Thank you, mysterious man with a large, large vat of liquid nitrogen. He just follows me around. I've got to be really careful here. Goggles. Just put it in.
Yep.
So the liquid nitrogen is going to be removing the heat from the steel. For how long do we have to leave that?
Just about 10 seconds. It should get down to the right temperature.
In 10 seconds?
Yeah.
That liquid nitrogen will have removed that heat energy from the steel?
Yes.
That quickly? No wonder you have to be careful not to spill it on yourself. Right, coming through.
So the liquid nitrogen has dramatically lowered the temperature of the steel, just as the gas carbon as it's piped on board the ship.
Right, if we're ready, 3, 2, 1. It's broken. Badly. Look at that. It's just shattered. So it's exactly the same sample, same metal. This one barely a scratch. This one just shattered. Behaved completely differently.
In a brittle manner.
Brittle, ductile.
Ductile.
Brittle, cold.
Clearly then, you wouldn't want to rely on that anywhere really cold. In a liquid tanker, for instance. Instead, the tanker engineers needed a material that can withstand super cold temperatures, which brings us back to cutlery of the stainless steel variety. In 1913, British chemist Harry Brearley was looking for a tough metal for gun barrels. He mixed chromium and steel, but it was too soft. However, the reject alloy revealed two unexpected benefits. It didn't rust, which was good for cutlery, and even better for liquid gas tanks. Putting this new stainless steel in the deep freeze doesn't make it brittle.
This is stainless steel. Not only is it very corrosion resistant, it's very, very tough at low temperatures.
OK, well, we now have our system here so we can test this.
Yep, let's
So we can do the same test. Same potential energy, kinetic energy in, see what happens. So, loading it in. Ooh, that's slightly sort of frightening when you do that. Right. Here is frozen sample. 3, 1. That's completely... It's just shrugged it off. So what's actually happening in it that's so different? Why is this fine and that's ruined?
Because of the alloying elements in the stainless steel, it's changed the crystal structure, the way the atoms are arranged in the metal.
So the between these two samples is right down at the atomic level.
It is, yes.
And that's where its ability to absorb the energy or be ruined by it stems from, right down at that level.
Simply adding some chromium can make ordinary brittle steel stand up to cryogenic temperatures.
The engineers who built the LNG carrier ensured that not only were the holes fit for the 7 seas, but that the thousands of metres of intricate pipework, with all their bends, joints and tapes, were made of a material that could take it when the going gets cold: stainless steel.
But transporting liquid by ship brings another challenge: stopping it from sloshing. And engineers have 2 liquids to worry about on these tankers. On the way out, they have a cargo of liquid gas, and on the return journey, when it's empty, they carry water as ballast to stabilise. The same problem in 2 different forms.
If a liquid cargo starts to wash around on a ship, it can be a real problem. Basically, when wind or waves rock the ship itself, that can send the liquid from side to side in the tanks. That motion can build, emphasising the rocking of the ship itself, and, well, it can be disastrous.
It's called the free surface effect. I set out to discover just how bad it can be. And yeah, given my driving record, I am, well, perhaps more than a little nervous. Only a bit.
Right, what I have here is a van. Ordinary, apart from the massive tank fitted into the back, containing water. A lot of it. Water that's free to step about. So what I'm looking to experience is, for myself, firsthand, the free surface effect.
The free surface is literally the area available for a liquid to slosh around freely. And just in case it affects the van, I'm securely harnessed inside a roll cage. First, I took it slowly, to ensure just a little bit of sloshing.
As I turn into the corner, obviously the water wants to stay where it is, to the right. Ooh, it does, yes, it is sort of affecting the way it feels. If I go this way, and then this way, it doesn't feel. Ooh, yeah, it's sloshy, I can feel it. The vehicle in a direction other than the one in which I want it to go. I don't know whether it's me driving or the tank of water. That's a strange feeling.
Time to step on it and imagine our ship and its liquid cargo rolling through stormy seas. Well, step on it as much as I can in a van.
Yeah, a lot of water going around. It's very unpleasant. Go as well as it might have done.
As I corner, the momentum of the slosh capsizes my little van.
Yeah, that is the free surface effect. As it turns out, it's deeply uncomfortable.
Scale might tumble up to a whole ship and disaster ensues. In 1987, the free surface effect capsized the Herald of Free Enterprise ferry when water gushed in through the accidentally remained open, and almost 200 people died. Liquid natural gas tankers have a surprising solution to this problem. To reduce the free surface area, the gas tanks are spherical, like great big balls. There's less room for sloshing, as long as the tank is full or empty. These tankers fill up with cargo, 98%. Set off, make a long journey, get there, and discharge it, or nearly all of it, keeping back just enough to use as fuel for the journey home. So the tank, in normal circumstances, is either almost entirely full or almost entirely empty. No sloshing. Empty of cargo, the tanker would ride high in the sea. To lower it, water is pumped into ballast compartments in the hull beneath the gas tanks. Space doesn't need these compartments to be spherical, so preventing sloshing here calls for a different solution. Rewind to World War II. Bombing raids kept British firefighters busy. They used a tanker lorry carrying almost 4,000 litres of water. The free surface effect made it dangerous to drive. By contrast, modern fire engines hurtle around without overturning. And that is thanks to baffles, not as in but load dividers. These are physical barriers, first introduced in the 1880s to stop oil tankers capsizing. Obviously, what led to my slight incident there was the free surface effect, allowing the water to slosh from side to side, and it brought the whole van over. So the key ones here in my baffles are these longitudinal ones that stop the water going from side to side. Apparently this works. Find out. So far, all seems okay. And just as they keep the van stable, baffles protect tankers from capsizing. Dividers in those ballast compartments under the gas tanks stop the water from sloshing around. No free surface effect. Surprisingly, they don't use ballast gas tanks. One reason is because friction could heat up the cargo, turning it back into gas. You want that. Empty or full, these ships are stable. But propelling a full tanker is more than a little challenging. Laden, this tanker weighs 113,000 tons. Underway, it takes an hour to bring it to a complete standstill. But how do you get it going in the first place? You might expect a modern vessel to be driven by a complicated computer system and very fancy mechanisms. Well, you'd be right about the computers, but the mechanisms are a different matter.
At the heart of this vast tanker, there is, not surprisingly, a vast engine. It's immensely powerful, making 30,000 horsepower, in fact, to drive the ship across the seas around the world. It's very clever, it's very high-tech, but inside, it's based on a principle that was hundreds of years ago.
Tens of hundreds, in fact. Meet the old Aeoli pile, or as it's more commonly known, Hero's engine, after the Greek scientist who invented it. Here's how it works. In the base here is a reservoir of water. What I'm going to do is heat that water up, thus. When you heat the water, it turns to steam.
This bit goes on top, so the steam rises up here. And now the only way out for the steam is through tiny, tiny holes in the ends of these nozzles here. Then it all gets a bit Newtonian, because when the steam comes out that way, it exerts an equal and opposite reaction, a push that way, and sets the top spinning. All we've got to do now is wait for it to build up pressure. There wasn't much to be doing in those days, obviously, so waiting for things was great. Do some philosophy while we wait, perhaps.
You might think this spinning pot is simply a toy. But no, this same principle was used by the ancient Greeks in a machine to open temple doors. Fast forward a couple of thousand years and steam transforms the world, powering industry and transport. And then steam engines went the way of top hats, and now we think of them as yesterday's machines. But in a safely remote, muddy field, I set out to learn what the engineers of liquid gas tankers know very well. Steam is power. You just need to put it under pressure. The more, the better. I've brought steam engine specialist Richard Gibbo, along to demonstrate steam's true potential. We're going to put water in this super strong container buried in the mud. Steam from the traction engine will heat the water. Normally it would boil, turn into gas, escape, just as it does from your kettle. But that shiny lid prevents the water from turning to steam because it can't expand. There isn't room. Instead, the pressure inside will simply get higher and higher until it explodes.
So this whole setup, Richard, is all about the power of steam. Now, I'll be honest, I think... Oh, I mean, look at that sweet old thing. It's from the past. And you've got this little pot in the ground here and a pipe. Is steam that powerful?
Yeah, and there's a massive amount of energy locked up in water that is changing to steam, and that's what it's going to demonstrate.
So the kettle's underground. This is a pressure vessel. That's very strong, is it? This is a big...
It's very strong, but this is very weak.
So it's designed to go.
And when it does, the water in there is going to be at 140 degrees C, well above boiling point.
So you're going to take that water to 140 degrees?
We
so
are.
It's desperate to turn into steam.
It is, but it can't because the lid's on.
Richard, what's the shed for?
The shed to demonstrate that steam has a lot of force, power, energy.
So you're going to break this shed, I'm guessing?
Hope so.
Even well above its normal boiling point, the water won't turn to steam until the pressure is released when the lid bursts off. Then it will expand instantaneously, creating an explosion. First, though, the sacrificial shed.
Nobody walk on the big disc.
How many engineers does it take to move a garden shed? Quite a lot, it seems. Then even then, they managed to break it.
I don't know, it's a steam bomb.
Well, we've never done this before. It's new.
It's going well, this.
With the soon-to-be ex-shed in place, we fired up the boilers and Richard opened to pump steam into our underground kettle.
Okay. Slightly nearer.
Our steam bomb is ticking, and now all we can do is wait. As the metal kettle gets hotter, you can see the puddles around it boil and turn into steam. But the water inside, although it's well above boiling point, can't turn into steam until the lid blows off.
It's moving. Yes, it's moving.
The pressure gauge needle slowly ticked up. Gibbo expected it to blow at around 5 bar, which is 5.5 times atmospheric pressure. The boiling, muddy puddles make the shed steam like a f***er. The kettle lid starts to buckle under the mounting pressure.
5.5 bar.
Can I just say this is ridiculous?
5.5 bar comes and goes. We're in for a big bang when it happens. Gibbo thinks that even a 9-ton traction engine doesn't offer enough protection.
I think we should be at the bridge.
We retreated.
6.5.
And now we really are into unknown territory.
7. Properly dangerous now.
Any more, and we'll be close to running out of steam. The traction engine can only handle 10 bar, and if that lets go...
When?
Brilliant. What did that reach?
7.5 bar.
That's...
So, no more.
The simple power of water had given our shed an extreme steam clean and completely obliterated it. The vessel itself was, while a lid had been blown off.
There's the discs.
Yeah.
And you can't really see, but the vessel is empty and dry.
Every single bit of water turned
Yes.
instantly to steam and therefore expanded massively. So it's just force. Sorry about your shed. You've ruined it. Yeah. Yeah, steam is perhaps more powerful than I thought.
And it's that same steam power that drives giant liquid gas carriers through the world's oceans. As you might expect, everything about these tankers puts our mini steam bomb to shame.
This is also a pressure vessel, like the one I used to clean my shed, only it is a bit bigger. And there are 2 of them. And these are generating high-pressure steam all day, every day. So although in some ways this whole engine room looks a bit inert, a bit inactive, it's actually generating and containing incredible quantities of energy all the time.
Compared to 100 degrees in our pressure kettle in the shed, the steam here is at 510 degrees, and the pressure is 8 times higher. Mark Hodgson manages a liquid gas tanker fleet. He puts the power by those 2 massive containers into perspective.
They're just boilers making steam, and together they produce 110 tons an hour. That is equivalent to about an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Is processed by these units every day. And that steam pressure and temperature is delivered down to the turbine.
All right, so steam made here in big boilers. Steam goes downstairs to the turbine, and this is where Hero's engine comes in.
So the same principle that turned Hero's engine powers these monster tankers. It turns the propeller. It also provides all of the electricity for every single appliance on board, right down to the crew's TV. On these ships, the secret of harnessing power from steam lies in their turbines. Mark shows me the amazingly simple machine that generates the ship's electricity. Its lid was off. The hundreds of turbine blades that the steam physically turns.
OK, so steam comes in that end?
Yes.
And then what?
As the steam is injected at each stage, this is where you get the rotational forces applied to the rotor valve.
So this is where it starts to turn the whole thing. So there's an immense amount of force going through here, which rather explains the enormous stud here, because the pressure contained within this when it's up and running is huge.
It's a large casing, has to contain 60 bar steam.
There is such a thing as a beautiful simplicity. And this incredibly clever device has one moving part. The engine that drives this entire ship has one moving part. This, turned by steam. You wouldn't tighten it, would you?
Not really.
This turbine is powerful, but the one that drives the ship delivers 7.5 times more power.
The steam made in the boilers drives the turbine there behind me. That comes through to the gearbox, and from the gearbox is transferred to the propeller shaft there. And then out there at the stern of the ship, turns the propeller itself. At that point, it bites into the water and shoves forward with incredible force.
These tankers are designed to be super efficient. They cannibalize their own cargo to produce. And for the 25 tons of water they consume every day, they turn to the surrounding ocean. But salt water is horribly corrosive, and the crew just refuse to drink it, softies. So all the seawater is boiled and evaporated to remove the salt. And once again, it's steam that does the work. But to make it even more efficient, principle noted by the father of evolution, naturalist Charles Darwin. Investigating wildlife in the Andes Mountains, Darwin noticed something that plagues all mountaineers who try to boil potatoes. They take ages to cook. Darwin put it down to altitude, and he was right. We learn that water boils at 100 degrees C, but as Darwin noticed, the boiling point varies if you're up a mountain. The potatoes were taking longer to cook because at altitude air pressure is lower, so water boils at a lower temperature. The boiling water just wasn't hot, and you can't cook potatoes in cold water. You can even boil water without heating it at all if you reduce atmospheric pressure enough.
Right, switch the pump on. That is sucking the air out of there. That's lowering the pressure. This is to prove water will boil at a lower temperature at lower pressure. So, my marshmallow is to prove... See? That's a vacuum in there.
As you can see, marshmallows expand in low pressure.
Yeah, it's grisly, sorry. But the point here is not to prove what happens to marshmallow men in low pressure. It's quite funny. It's what happens to water. Actually, this is just like taking it up to high altitude where the pressure is lower. But obviously this is easier.
In fact, the pressure in the jar is the equivalent of being at nearly 26,000 meters, almost 3 times Mount Everest.
I think I can see some bubbles at the bottom. Remember, I'm introducing no heat here. It's just a room temperature, and this room is at a very low temperature. Oh dear. And there it goes. Now, it's not just splashing about for the fun of it. That water is boiling. And that's not because I've introduced any more heat to it. That's just because I've lowered the pressure. Right. Now, prove that it really is just at room temperature. Air flooding back in, pressure coming back up. Sorry, Marshmallow Man. Bad day. The point, room temperature. In fact, really very cold, but boiling away happily. I want to make a cup of tea with it, but point, I think, is proved.
So, boiling doesn't mean water reaches 100 degrees. It simply means it turns from liquid to gas, which it does at different temperatures according to pressure. And ship, just as I did in my vacuum flask, they boil water at a low temperature by reducing the pressure. Again, they harness steam. But they reverse the high pressure process when you make water expand quickly into steam. You make low pressure by going back the other way, condensing steam rapidly into water.
You need something called a condenser, and I'm going to build my own. 1 barrel to start off with, so that goes...
On board, they use leftover steam for the engines, but I need to rustle up my own. So, first, add a little water. Heat.
Gas on.
Wait, and wait, and wait, and Hey presto.
Right, finally got steam. So, very quickly I've got to remove the heat and seal it. Quickly as I can. So, lid goes on. I've got to seal it because it's important. No air can get in. That's sealed. Right, it's full of steam. What I'm going to do now is condense that steam back into water quickly. Here's the way. Right.
Water will flash condense the steam, reducing the pressure.
Creaking and groaning. As that steam condenses back into water, it shrinks, lowers the pressure in there, and the outside of the barrel still has to stand up, remember, to atmospheric pressure pushing in. Ooh. Yep. That's what happens when you lower the pressure inside. There was no way for air to get in to build the pressure up again. Atmospheric pressure was too much, and it collapsed.
Liquid gas carriers instantly turn steam back to water using flash condensation. And that creates a low pressure area, like my vacuum jar, in which they boil seawater at just 50 degrees. They don't bother with the marshmallows. That was just my idea. Thanks to a principle noted by the evolution, gas tankers save a huge amount of energy, and energy is the precious cargo these ships deliver. This is not some fuel-wasting monster ticking bomb. This giant ship is a smart and self-sufficient recycling. It takes all the water it needs from the ocean. It generates its own electricity, and its own cargo powers it day and night around the globe.
You could say they're like huge self-propelled gas bottles. Well, you could, but the fact is they are remarkable vessels using extraordinary technology to keep a potentially hazardous cargo safe and very cold.
And it was all made possible by stainless steel cutlery, a problem with the fire truck, an ancient method for opening tomb doors, Charles Darwin's potatoes, and a pre-war mail plane. This is the Rion and Tyrion Bridge in Greece, one of the longest bridges in the world. It crosses some of the most active earthquake fault lines in Europe. It also sits in a powerful natural wind tunnel. And there's nothing solid at the bottom of the sea to build it on.
To make matters worse, this coast is moving away from that coast every day.
How did they ever build?
They face what would have been an impossible challenge if it weren't for some unusual connections.
The hammock. A fizzy pop can.
Oh no! There's a fire! Oh, this is lovely.
A toboggan. Indian incense.
These contain an oil that really does smell lovely.
And a steel chimney. The Gulf of Corinth slices deep into mainland Greece. but at its western end, it's very narrow. To avoid a 280-mile detour around the mainland of Greece, you need to cross this small stretch of water. Sounds simple.
On one side of the Gulf of Corinth, Rion. On the other, Antirion. And see what they did? Rion, Anti-Rion. 100 years ago, the Greek Prime Minister dreamed of a bridge to connect the two places. Without some unprecedented engineering, that bridge would still be a dream.
Almost 3 kilometers in length, the Rion-Antirion Bridge is really long, but most incredibly, it's practically earthquake-proof. Which is reassuring, as it sits in one of the most active seismic zones in all of Europe. It can withstand shocks measuring 7.4 on the Richter scale, enough to completely destroy your average bridge. Back in 2008, the bridge was hit by a tremor. The shaking ground had caused buildings to collapse less than 25 kilometers away, killing 2 people and injuring many more. Amidst the chaos, the bridge survived unscathed, allowing emergency traffic to pass safely and quickly over the Gulf. But surprisingly, shaking ground wasn't the first challenge earthquakes posed to the bridge builders. Before they could start, they had to deal with what lay at the bottom of the sea.
For the engineers, this was always going to be a bridge over troubled waters. Yeah, I know, sorry, but it was. Just getting started was going to be a huge engineering challenge. In fact, when they began, they still didn't know how they were going to lay their foundations. Here is 65 meters deep. It's a challenge in itself, but at the bottom, there's nothing but sand and silt for hundreds of meters down. There's no solid bedrock. And no solid bedrock means no solid foundations.
Solid foundations are, of course, crucial to any structure, especially when they're shaken by frequent earthquakes. Combining a sandy seabed with seismic activity results in a relatively little-known danger from earthquakes, called liquefaction. In a tremor, soft, wet ground literally turns to liquid, which really is as bad as it sounds. Nobody in the world had ever before set out to build a bridge in these conditions. The engineers came up with a solution that seems to defy logic. But first, why does a tremor turn sand and water into a liquid? I've created an earthquake machine to replicate the conditions at the bottom of the Gulf of Corinth. The engine is going to play the part of an earthquake. The sand and water can play themselves, and to get a shaking feel for the problem, I'll be the bridge itself.
If you add an earthquake to loose, wet ground, something pretty strange can happen, as I shall now demonstrate. Here we have the loose, wet ground. It's sand, but it's, solid enough. Standing in here quite happily. OK, if we're ready then, chaps, take it away. Now, my earthquake is starting. It is really very loud and very shaky. And straight away I see water coming to the top. In fact, I think I'm starting to sink. That's a lot of water. Clearly, what's happened is, apart from being deafened, I've sunk. It isn't that the water's on the top, and I'm in the ground. So I need to find out what's happened. I need to get out, and that's not very easy. Okay, I am actually part of the ground now. Yeah. The
There's no approved technique for doing this, obviously, because... hold on. Yeah. Obviously, in the Western movie version of this, I'd get my horse by the side of the quicksand and he'd pull me out with a reins. OK.
The ground holds me up fine before the earthquake. Then it turns into quicksand. As it's shaken, the whole thing changes from liquid to liquid. It liquefies, and I sink. Geotechnical engineer Stuart Haig explains that the key is that the sand is wet.
When the sand crystals are shaken, the spaces in between them, or the pores, try and get smaller, and the water that's in there gets squashed and the pressure goes up. Once that happens, on top of it, whether it's you or a building, sinks into the ground.
Combine wet sand with seismic shocks, and it's a killer. When a huge earthquake hit Kobe Harbor, Japan, in 1995, over 6,000 people died. It measured 7.2 on the Richter scale. Sure enough, the ground was sandy and full of water. When the mix was shaken and stirred, the result was catastrophic liquefaction. Literally, the previously solid ground became liquid. Ordinarily, engineers can drain the sand to get rid of the water, or compact it so that the water is squeezed out. None of this was possible in the Gulf. You can't drain the bottom of the sea, and there's sand to compact up to 500 meters deep, an impossible task.
There was no solution in the bridge builder's manual, so the Rion designers had to come up with their, which they did, thanks to incense. This is vetiver grass, and it's used to make incense, thanks to a sweet-smelling volatile oil in the roots. But it wasn't the oil they were after. These are the roots down in here. These contain an oil that really does smell lovely. Now, this grass originates in swamps in India, so harvesting it was horribly difficult, snakes and awful conditions. The growers soon learnt to grow it in places more convenient for harvesting, on riverbanks. What I then noticed was that these roots, which can grow up to 7 meters long in fully grown plants, stabilized the soft ground they were growing in. And that's what interested the bridge designers.
The way that long, thin roots of the vetiver grass stabilized riverbanks worked for the bridge engineers too. With my own earthquake rig, I'm going to put their solution to the test.
Here you go, Jim. Is this it?
That's it.
And just this many? I'll fix it.
6 will be fine.
And it's going to be an earthquake of the same strength as before. OK, well, look, I'm going to trust you and your theory. I'm not going to put my waders back on. I'm going to go in. I shall wear just my new boots.
You'll be fine.
Really?
Yeah.
It's not that I can't sink. The rods don't actually touch the bottom of the tank. They work because they reduce movement in the sand. So they should stop my board from sinking. My new boots should stay new.
All right. Let's do it. Don't ruin my new boots. Go! I'm not going further. After some initial settling, it does the job. And so by sinking steel rods into the seabed, the engineers managed to stabilise it. And actual vetiver grass is used to stabilise riverbanks and cliff edges across the world, from Africa to Fiji. Those long, thin roots hold the soil together.
Beneath 3 of the 4 piers of the Rion Bridge are 200 metal piles driven into the sand. They're just like my small ones in the sand, but here each pile is huge, at least 25 meters long. They still don't reach the bedrock. Even more surprising, the bridge doesn't rest on these piles. The tops of the piles are almost a metre beneath the base of the piers. But they're enough to keep the sand from liquidizing, even in an earthquake. The bridge won't sink. This solution had never been used before.
Until the construction of this bridge, building on wet sand earthquake zone was, well, obviously a big no-no. But thanks to a fragrant gift from Mother Nature, the engineers came up smelling of vetiver grass.
Even though the entire weight of the bridge is held up these 4 piers, the engineers had succeeded in keeping them from sinking into the ground in an earthquake.
But as soon as they saw the problem here, another one came up. They could stop the piers from sinking in an earthquake. But how could they stop them from toppling over?
In an earthquake, the Earth moves vigorously from side to side and would take the gigantic piers with it. That could be a big problem for a big bridge. Phil Corbett has offered to take me a bit closer to the problem. The piers are actually hollow, so I'm going to go right down to the bottom of them. This is just the first floor down, and I'm starting to get a real sense of what I've taken on.
Oh! That's the centre of the Earth. It must be.
Well, it is a nerve-wracking 110 meters down in total. There can't be that much further to go now, surely. And then, just when I thought I'd reached the bottom...
Well, I've been climbing down ladders and for what felt like weeks, and this is all I've done. Sea level. And there's a whole lot more yet to come, because this is on and on and on down there.
33 flights of stairs later.
This is it then. Bottom of the sea, 65 meters above, is the surface of the sea. Under there, the bed.
These are the biggest bridge piers of their kind in the world. This one weighs 171,000 tons, and from down here to the top, it's about 30 stories.
90 meters across at the base of this thing.
In an earthquake, it is almost impossible to imagine, but to keep it from falling over, this whole gigantic tower needs to move freely from side to side. If the base got stuck, the whole thing would topple over. The engineers need to make sure that each pier can move freely. So what to do?
The answer to that lies in an age-old winter pastime.
The Rion-Antirion Bridge has one thing in common with winter sports. They both involve moving freely.
Of course, tempting as it is,
I didn't come here to play in the snow. Just like a toboggan, the bridge piers have to slide freely over the sea floor, which is made of sand. But they don't slide well on sand because of their shape. To show you what I mean, this board is flat, like the bottom of the bridge pier.
Yeah. Problem is the leading edge is digging in, or towing in, as they say in the trade, and it won't go anywhere. That could have been a problem for the Rion Bridge.
Sliding down a hill of loose sand is one thing, but does a pier on the flat sea really have the same problem? I've got myself an accurate scale model of a bridge pier. Well, give or take a few hundred meters. It's currently being supported without a problem by this ultra-smooth track of fine sand. This time, to create the effect of the ground moving side or laterally, the role of the earthquake will be played by a 4x4. I've also brought along Ian Price, an expert in stabilising soils.
So even though we're not at the bottom by any means, you reckon this is a good representation of what might happen 65 metres down?
Yeah, we're attempting to simulate that effect.
OK. Right, so I'm going to drive away, because this is a lateral force we're talking about.
It is.
So
we're talking about large lateral forces, Richard.
Yeah. Well, this is a large lateral force.
Well, I'm going to stand well.
OK, I'm going to create an earthquake. Start.
Ah.
My pier fell over. So this is the towing in you're talking about?
That's right.
Why did it fall and why didn't it just keep following me?
Because the weight overcame the ability of the sand structure.
In an earthquake, the piers of the Rion Bridge would be pushed sideways, like this. As it moves, the leading edge puts more pressure on the sand beneath it, until it's more than the sand can support. It digs or tows in, and then it topples over. Really not what you want. So the key is how much pressure from the leading edge a material can support. In winter sports, the solution is simple. Take away the leading edge altogether. Make your snowboard or toboggan curl up at the front. That's fine for a toboggan, but making mammoth pier bases that look like giant sleds would be virtually impossible to construct. They needed another solution. The one they chose was extreme. Rather than change the shape of the piers, they decided to change the surface of the seabed. For their solution, the bridge engineers need to understand why you tow in to soft material.
I've got to ask, why is there a paddling pool full of what appears to be mashed potato?
Well, this demonstrates what the engineers found on the site of the Rion-Atrion Bridge. What we have there is silts and clays, which are very, very soft, very analogous to mashed potato, and there is no way sands will support the weight of a structure. Just try it yourself, Richard.
What?
See if...
Get in?
Yeah. Well...
All right, fair enough. This is not something I've done before. Right, so I'm the bridge. Oh, clearly, yeah. Mashed potato isn't going to be up to the job.
Yeah, mash is obviously too soft to support me. But there is a way that exactly the same can support more pressure.
These, then, are just potatoes.
They are.
And they... Well, perfectly, they'll support me. So, obviously, those potatoes are mashed and these aren't, but there's still a paddling pool full of potatoes. What's the difference? Why does this work and that doesn't?
The difference is particle size. Potatoes are a larger particle size, and consequently, you get increased bearing resistance.
So just the bigger particle size, same material, actually, but smaller particles of it over there, and I sink down through them, bigger particles here, and they can hold up more.
That's right.
So the answer to the bridge builders' problems, then, was potato?
Well, not exactly potatoes, but a larger particle size of gravel.
So, gravel was just what the engineers needed. Instead of changing the shape of the piers to make them curl up at the edges, they changed the seabed with a layer of gravel. A huge job. I'm going to create another 4x4 earthquake and put the pier on a gravel base. It should support the leading edge so it won't and fall over.
So the only change this time is we replace the strap.
Yes.
And this will make all the difference?
Yes.
You reckon?
Oh, I think so.
I'm going to bring on an earthquake. Stand back. That made all the difference.
It did.
So it does work. Clearly, then, the answer for the engineers was to build their bridge on unmashed potatoes. Well, no, gravel.
At the bottom of the Gulf of Corinth, the Rion Bridge rests on a thick layer of gravel above the steel. This allows the bridge piers to slide from side to side without digging or towing in. They used enough gravel on the seabed beneath the Rion-Antirion Bridge to cover 2 football pitches, 3 metres deep.
These massive piers are amazing. They stand but without being fixed to the seabed so they can move and withstand earthquakes. And they are massive, 90 metres across at the base, the biggest in the world. So, all the engineers had to do now was link these super piers together and they built themselves a bridge. Simple.
The piers really are awesome. But they're obviously only part of the story. Their purpose is to hold up the bridge deck, which is what it's all about.
A trip to Antirion for the people of Rion used to mean a 40-minute flight. The bridge has turned that into a 7-minute drive. It really has transformed the lives of people on the northern and southern coasts, becoming just part of their everyday ritual. On a normal day, 12,000 cars might use it. On a busy day, that could rise to 30,000.
That's a lot of traffic. So the bridge deck has 4 lanes as well as 2 safety lanes that run for almost 3 kilometres in each direction.
It's mammoth. And if the engineers fixed it to any of the piers, and those piers then moved in an earthquake, which the gravel allows them to do, it could buckle or break. Not good. Right, what we need now is another of my earthquake demonstrations. This one is a little imagination, bear with me. This is my road deck, which I'm going to fit, well, to this boat. For the purposes of this, the boat represents the piers of the bridge. So that's the piers here supporting the road deck, concrete and steel fixed to it, solid. Now we're going to have an earthquake. For that I need muscle, so I'm going to break out the Herefordshire Special Ballet Squad. In you come then, lads, please, come on. Right, I got a bit of muscle to make the earthquake. I'm going to be the traffic on the road deck, fixed solidly to the... So, getting into place. I'm the traffic on the deck. Oh no, I hope there isn't an earthquake shortly. Go on, let's let it rip. As an experience, it's unpleasant, but if this were a road deck on a bridge, and I would heavy traffic on it, clearly the stresses that the materials will be subject to, catastrophic. It's not going to work. Quake, the whole thing could collapse.
To save the bridge deck from the violent and chaotic movements of an earthquake, the engineers needed to build it in a way that allowed it to move independently of the piers, which is where sailors and their sleeping arrangements come in.
Christopher Columbus encountered hammocks in South America, and he brought them back to Europe. And early sailors very quickly discovered they were quite handy things for making life more bearable on board. Because, well, ships weren't the most sophisticated of devices then. Things could get pretty rough. But no matter how rough the seas, the hammock would isolate them from the movement and make life just about bearable. They didn't know it, but in fact a hammock is, well, it's a kind of pendulum. And it has a steady rate it wants to move at, which it will do regardless of what's going on around it. And it meant sailors were more comfortable, and what's good enough for them is actually good enough for the bridge.
So just as a pendulum, or rather a hammock, swings gently on board a ship in rough seas, it ought to make my ride earthquake simulator a bit smoother too.
Here is my modified bridge. Remember the boat, the bridge piers, the structure. This hammock now represents the deck, slung between them. Right, I need to break out the buoys to hold the bridge steady first of all, please. And then, I hope there isn't another earthquake. Right, I'm getting onto the road deck, which now is slung pendulum style, just like a hammock. Goodness, what if an earthquake were to occur right now when I'm on this bridge? And actually it is already, and straight away. What's happening here is the hammock, the pendulum suspension, is isolating me from the movement of the piers. When things get pretty bad, I mean, this is a pretty disastrous earthquake we're experiencing right now. The pendulum is turning chaotic movement into something a bit more predictable and a lot more gentle. And I can imagine straight away how this would stay standing.
The Rion engineers borrowed that principle to help earthquake-proof their bridge. Just like a hammock, the deck on bridge is fully suspended from the top of the piers. It's unique in all the world. Incredibly, as the piers move in an earthquake, the deck swings independently. It seemed yet again the engineers had tamed the earthquake. But their free-swinging solution might itself have created a problem.
So our bridge, thanks to its hammock pendulum principle, can move about independently of the Earth. Of course, if the earthquake gets really bad, at some point, there's the danger that the bridge itself is going to hit the piers that are there to support it. And that could be catastrophic.
The deck can swing freely, but if it swings too far in either direction, it would smash into one of the 4 thin arms of the piers. That's 75,000 tons of road hitting the concrete. A big moving mass, and it could destroy the bridge. The engineers couldn't allow it to happen. But once an object as big as the road deck starts moving, it takes something extraordinary to stop it. Enter the viscous damper, an ultra-powerful brake system.
To experience a viscous damper firsthand, I've devised a little experiment. Demonstration.
First, what happens with no brakes, no viscous damper?
That in front of me is a teeter-totter.
Basically, it's a giant seesaw. But this is no playground, and that is a mighty big drop at the other side.
And this, in my car, is a roll cage, just in case my confidence outstrips my skill. Right, what I'll do is drive up there.
It's my job to drive up the pivot point and then let gravity do its worst. Of course, the higher I go, the further I'm going to fall.
I'm not enjoying this at all.
The pivot point must be somewhere about here.
This is just horrible. I can't see it where I'm going. At some point, I know something bad's going to happen. That much is guaranteed. I can smell clutch. Ooh. That's so very hot.
For the purposes of this demonstration, what just happened to my car as it hit the tarmac is the equivalent of the free-swinging bridge deck violently hitting the pier that holds it up during an earthquake. If the deck swung hard enough, it could break the bridge. The engineers needed to slow the deck movement, and I need to stop the seesaw banging down so hard. We some brakes, which is where viscous damping comes in. It's a braking system where you use a liquid to resist movement. If you've ever tried to run in a swimming pool, you'll know all about the resistance water can create. This black box full of water. And there's also a fan in there, which will have to move through it, absorbing all the energy from the seesaw. It's a brake.
This is a viscous damper. It's basically a liquid, in this case, water, that slows the movement. It would give me a softer landing. Only one way to find out. Okay. Any minute now we should approach balance point. This is lovely. That really does work perfectly. What happens is the vertical motion of the teeter-totter of the seesaw is slowed down by the rotary motion of the fan inside the liquid. Essentially what it does is turn some of that energy, that kinetic energy, into heat inside the damper. It gives me a much, much softer landing, kind of to my car.
Viscous dampers are used all over the place to soften movement. These planes are coming in to land on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. They approach at over 200 kilometers an hour, but they can stop in such short distances thanks to viscous dampers that are attached to the catch wires stretched across the runway. And the bridge is fitted with its own incredible liquid safety system. These things that look like pistons are the viscous dampers, and they're just like my system, in principle. This footage shows the dampers being tested. Instead of a fan spinning in water, a piston has to move through oil, which is much thicker, more viscous, than water, so it offers much more resistance to movement. In infrared, you can see it heating up. So the liquid is turning all that kinetic energy, that movement, into heat. The viscous dampers on the bridge are the biggest in the world. Slinging the road deck like a hammock allows the bridge deck to move, and the viscous dampers stop it from moving so it doesn't hit the arms of the piers and shake itself to bits. The designers made this extraordinary bridge uniquely earthquake-proof, with unprecedented solutions. But all this flexibility created a further problem, because earthquakes aren't the only natural hazard in this region. Mother Nature has another trick up her sleeve. This stretch of the Gulf of Corinth, with mountains on either side, makes a natural wind tunnel. A flexible bridge good for withstanding earthquakes, but it's bad when it's windy. Even with the dampers to soften movement, near constant winds in the Gulf mean the bridge would be swaying constantly.
And then for the engineers, make the bridge flexible enough to cope with an earthquake, and on normal days when there isn't an earthquake it would swing so it would be uncrossable thanks to the winds in the Gulf of Corinth, but make it strong enough to cope with the wind by fixing it firmly in place, and when there is an earthquake it'll snap and crumble into an 800 million euro pile of rubble. The answer to their lies in this fizzy pop can.
Engineers usually design things to fail. They build them to withstand the daily challenges they will face, to be strong and rugged, and to stay that way.
Helpfully for the Rion Bridge, an inventor threw away the usual rules of engineering after a frustrating picnic. He needed a new way of opening a can.
The humble tin can has been around for 2 years. It can keep produce fresh for decades and transformed the food industry. But they weren't designed for easy access. Getting into them required some muscle. That changed when inventor Ermal Fraze came up with a new way of opening them, which revolutionized cans and protects the Rion Bridge.
Yep, this is a just on my own. Ermal Fraze found himself on a picnic with a canned drink.
But someone had forgotten to pack the can opener.
Being a resourceful sort of chap, he managed to wrestle it open on his car bumper, but that chrome off the bumper. So he went away and thought about the problem, and he devised the pull tap, precursor to today's stay tap. This weak section here is designed to be strong enough to keep the fizzy drink condensed in, but weak enough so that by hand, without any sort of machine, you can just rip it open. This has to fail at a limit. It has to fail predictably. Oh, yeah. And it does. I've made a bit of a mess of my picnic, though.
In the right case, making something fail predictably can be the difference between life and death.
For my recently have reorganised your workshop and tidied away a load of cardboard boxes into a corner and then inexplicably soaked them in petrol for some reason, and then decided to catch up on that bit of angle grinding you've been meaning to get to for so long. Oh no! There's a fire! That could be a real problem without predictable failure. What's just happened? This is a sprinkler system. I installed it myself, which is fortunate because I've forgotten where I put the fire extinguisher. It's pretty much exactly the same as a sprinkler system you'll find in schools and buildings across the world, but it's a lot uglier. Well, it works in exactly the same way. Disaster averted. And here's how it works. This is the sprinkler system. The job to do sounds pretty complicated. It's got to automatically detect a fire and then automatically put it out. But the way it does that is pretty simple. This is the kind of thing you will have seen sticking out of the ceiling in offices and shops and schools. These are connected to a along here. Now, before they've been triggered, they feature this little glass vial. This has been designed 68 degrees, it breaks.
The red liquid boils at exactly 68 degrees. That makes the pressure inside high enough to break the glass.
That's the predictable failure. They can predict 68 degrees, that goes. When that happens, that falls away, and it opens up the hole here. Water can just flood out, hit that disc, and form the sprinkler effect, putting the fire out automatically. And it's all thanks to a predictable in there.
Engineers have adopted the pop can principle of predictable failure all over the place to help us go about our daily lives safely. Think circuit breakers, such as fuses that cut out when electrical circuits overload, or airbags that inflate in an accident. Life goes on normally, but we're protected the moment something changes. So how does predictable failure help the bridge against winds? You stop the bridge moving unless it's struck by a massive shock. Don't allow wind pressure to swing it, but it breaks free and protects itself in an earthquake. Dr. Papanikolaou showed me how the combination of the fizzy pop can theory and the viscous dampers keep the bridge safe.
So, where are the predictable failures in here, then? Because it all looks massive and so...
Okay. What you have here is the deck. It is laterally supported, the dampers. And in the middle one, you have what we call a strut.
Oh, so that solves the problem of the wind. That
of the wind, because during every day you don't want to swing back and forth.
Yeah.
Inside each strut, there's a so-called fuse. It's designed to break at a limit, just like a ring pull. When the load gets too big, it fails. The fuses can take the load of even the strongest winds, but when an earthquake hits and the load exceeds the preset limit, they break, and those huge viscous dampers start to work. And this isn't just theory. This CCTV footage caught the action in June 2008. A magnitude 6.5 earthquake hit the bridge. The fuse snapped and the damper sprang into action. It worked.
So as designers, as engineers, seeing your creation actually work and do what you always knew it would do, but actually seeing it for real must have been amazing.
Yes, it's an unbelievable feeling.
Yeah.
This is the feeling of engineering.
An earthquake and windproof bridge, all thanks to predictable failure, courtesy of Ermal Fraser's easy open drinks can.
Well, that covers just about everything. Foundations, earthquake-proofed. Check. Piers, the deck, earthquake and windproofed. Check. Oh, no, hold on. We've forgotten something. Cables.
Believe it or not, the same cables that hold the road deck could pose a more threat to the bridge. Not because of earthquakes, not even because of gale-force winds. Just a gentle breeze can be lethal. Nearly 10,000 kilometers away in Baytown, Texas, the cables of the Fred Hartman Bridge began to look a lot less than solid. Spring 1997, 2 years the bridge opened. In winds as low as 18 kilometers an hour, the cables bounced up and down ferociously. This happened time and time again. The structure suffered 100 separate stress failures, which could have been disastrous. Fortunately, the Texas Department of Transportation had been alerted and fixed it by tying all the cables together, holding each other down. The same conditions that threatened the Fred Hartman Bridge are a risk to any lightweight, round metal structure, such as a cable, a tower, or a chimney. The Emily Moore TV mast in Yorkshire, England, was constructed in 1964, one of a new generation of lightweight structures built of metal rather than brick. In 1969, in light winds, the tower collapsed without warning. Ice build-up was blamed initially, but British aerodynamicist Kit Scruton knew it was due to a bizarre aerodynamic effect.
It's called shedding, and it's nowhere near as difficult to understand as it sounds like it's going to be.
To demonstrate, I've got a fan and that metal pole over there.
So, let's make it a windy day.
That vibration is caused by swirls of air. This specially shot footage shows exactly what's happening. See the swirls moving from side to side. That's called vortex shedding. Any round structure creates these swirls of air, which can pull it one way and then the other.
You've got to remember, of course, that that's not buffeting it. It's not gusting that's causing that shaking to happen. It's one vortex being shed after another that makes vibrate like that. And a further problem there is if this goes on long enough, shaking and shaking and shaking, the metal itself will fatigue. It can be a catastrophic failure.
It moves towers from side to side and can move cables on bridges up and down, as the Fred Hartman Bridge in Texas can testify. Fortunately, British aerodynamicist Kit Scruton worked out how to overcome the lethal threat from vortex shedding. He invented the helical strake. A helical strake is a strip of metal that winds like a big coiled spring around the top of tall steel towers today. It keeps them safe from the powers of vortex.
Yeah, now I know it looks like what I've done is tie blue string around another tap. But this is more than that. This is a helical strake. The theory runs, what this does is, as the wind arrives at the structure, instead of a vortex forming the length of it, rolling around and shedding, and then another one, which sets up that movement, it picks those vortices up. And that simple act, breaking them up and changing the time at which they come around, evens the whole process out. No vibration, no failure of the structure. That's the theory. Now I'm going to make it a windy day and test it. So my blue string, helical, works.
And now you can see them everywhere. Just take a look next time you're out. Back on the Rion-Antirian Bridge, every cable is fitted with one of Kit Scruton's helical strakes. The wind hitting the cables to protect the bridge from vortex shedding. On top of everything else, to accommodate for the fact is moving away from Antirian, the bridge has the largest expansion joints in the world, allowing for the two coasts to drift 5 meters away from each other.
Now, what have they done to protect against possible meteor strikes? Well, it's a thought.
The Rion-Antirian Bridge achieved what was previously impossible. In an active earthquake zone and natural wind tunnel, and without bedrock for foundations, the engineers created a magnificent that overcame each of these hurdles. Remarkably, despite the need for unprecedented engineering solutions, the bridge opened 4 months ahead of schedule, fulfilling a century-old dream. Now it's part of the daily life of the people of Rion and Antirian. But the has been felt far beyond these 2 small towns, because it has effectively redrawn the map of Greece. And none of it would have been possible without a hammock.
Go on, let's let it rip.
Some Indian incense, a steel chimney, the principles of tobogganing, and a fizzy pop can.
This is lovely. Oh no! There's a...
NASA's Space Shuttle is the most complex machine ever built, making it one of the world's most expensive vehicles.
But then it does travel 25 times faster than a speeding bullet, and it carries cargoes worth tens of millions.
It's the world's first reusable spaceship. On each mission, it flies around 6.5 kilometers. But no matter how clever the rocket scientists behind it are, this incredible feat of engineering wouldn't have been possible without a church organ, a German U-boat, tram mats, a camera,
it's mega,
and a cannonball. The Apollo moon missions were a resounding success. But even as man walked on the moon, the question was, what would NASA do next? The answer was the Space Shuttle. It launches into the Florida sky from the pads behind me. And as the world's first reusable space vehicle, it's made the final frontier just another destination. A fleet of 5 shuttles has blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center more than 130 times. They've delivered well over 1,000 tons of cargo, including most of the International Space Station and the Hubble telescope. Not bad for a delivery truck, albeit quite an expensive one. A new one will set you back a cool $1.7 billion. And taking it out for a spin costs about $450 million. But NASA designed the shuttle to reduce the cost of space exploration, so the shuttle is reusable. An ingenious jack of all trades, part plane, part rocket. I've come to look behind the scenes. Only astronauts or rocket engineers get close to the shuttle.
This is the place where it starts, so next stop, space.
But as they prepare for the last ever launches, NASA has given me special access to see how it really works.
Which the tiles are made.
To get to grips with the shuttle on a much smaller scale, the gift shop comes in pretty handy.
What most of the shuttle is this bit, the white plane that carries astronauts and cargo. It's actually called the orbiter, and that's the bit that goes in. At the back, it has 3 engines. They're big and they're thirsty, and the fuel for those is stored here in this orange fuel tank. But even together, that whole combo isn't enough. So, 2 solid rocket boosters are fitted to the side to provide more thrust. So that's 2 different forms of propulsion going on.
The 3 main engines burn furiously during the shuttle's 8.5-minute ascent into orbit. They're extremely powerful, 37 million horsepower to be precise. And they propel the 2,000-ton shuttle up to 650 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Now, allowed me into the workshop where they overhaul the engines.
This is our main engine shop. This is where we prepare all these motors after they've flown to reinstall and get ready to go again.
And these are they.
Mike Cosgrove is no ordinary grease monkey. He's one of NASA's elite scientists.
These are the next set of engines we're going to be installing. We're finishing up the processing on those. They've flown and gone through our here and been completely refurbished, and we're just putting the final touches.
So these are being used next?
This will be used next.
This isn't a one-shot deal, is it?
No, this is a reusable engine. Some of these motors have flown up to 25 times.
4 million miles
per trip.
This could be 100 miles on.
Absolutely.
Probably time for service.
These engines don't just travel enormous distances, they withstand extreme temperatures. Without any protection, they would self-destruct. Temperatures exceed 1,300 degrees C, or 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
At 6,000 degrees, what would they do?
Normal metals would melt.
Yeah.
God.
And that is a problem. Engines that melt will never do the job they're supposed to do. It's like trying to make a kettle out of chocolate.
And we start with the definition of uselessness, a chocolate kettle. Chocolate kettles, of course, famously useless because in order to heat water to be hot enough to make a decent cup of tea, well, on the way, melt the kettle. Chocolate is designed to melt in the mouth. In other words, at just below body temperature. So just to prove the point, I shall now try to make the lovely cup of tea. Yeah, clearly already it is having... Yep, its reputation is clearly deserved. Useless.
NASA's shuttle engineers face the same problem. Engines made of most metals would melt at operating temperatures. To stop this from happening, the rocket scientists turned to much simpler machines. Ones that blasted air through church organs back in 19th century Britain. And this is the job those machines had to do.
Right, to work. This is the lever, those are the bellows. I pump the lever, it puts air into the system.
And there you have it, the original Hammond organ. Okay, can resist it.
Of course, inevitably, after a time, along came a machine to replace, well, the person who pumps the organ.
In the 1880s, the internal combustion engine was still in its infancy. The one first used to pump air into church organs introduced an ingenious new invention.
And it would have been a machine very much like this one that replaced me, driving the bellows to provide air for the organ. It's a single-cylinder intercombustion engine, but it had a problem, like all internal combustion engines, and the clue is in the name, internal combustion. It's an going on inside it, here.
And that makes the engine hot, dangerously hot.
So, jacketed with water. There's a water jacket around it. Another cylinder full of water to cool.
Cold water is constantly circulating around the hot engine, removing the heat.
This was the first cooling system for an internal combustion engine.
It's a primitive version of what NASA uses on the shuttle. But while water is one of these engines, it's never going to do the job for NASA. At shuttle temperature, shuttles would get so hot, they wouldn't just melt, they would vaporize. So the rocket scientists had to take engine cooling to a whole new level. Luckily, NASA already had a great coolant on tap. Inside the giant orange tank is the fuel, super cold liquid hydrogen. At 153 degrees Celsius, it is perfect for cooling engines.
This is where you see the big fire come out the backside.
Yeah, this is a bit
we've
we've seen on the television. So it's at the back.
How are we going to cool this bad boy down? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a tap off of that liquid hydrogen that's being pumped around through the engine, and we're going to duct it down the side of the nozzle here through these distribution tubes. It's going to fill up this manifold, and then it's going to flow back up through 80 tubes into the main combustion chamber and burn it.
So the actual fuel that you're using is sent along these pipes here, and of all of these, I thought these were just marks. These are actual
These are tubes. These are
which cools this down.
Yes, this
protects it from the heat, and then it goes in and is burned.
Correct.
Which is one of the secrets to the incredible efficiency then of this engine, because you're actually using the fuel before you've burned.
Right.
The reason shuttle engines don't melt is because of a principle first used in an engine like this to drive the bellows on a church organ. A cooling system, the removal of heat.
The shuttle's fuel cooling system is efficient. It keeps the engines at a cool 54 degrees Celsius. But can all this rocket science help me boil water with a chocolate kettle? To test NASA's system, I've built a radical new prototype.
What we have here is something pretty special, because this is a chocolate kettle inspired by NASA. I've gone one better, in fact. This isn't just a chocolate kettle, it's a chocolate ice cream kettle, because that's what that is. Chocolate ice cream.
Is to stop my ice cream from melting as the water heats up.
Here's how it's working. This is the fuel for the burner down here, liquid propane. It's rushing along this narrow tube here, up here.
The shuttle, I'm using freezing cold fuel to do the cooling for me.
It then carries its way around here, down here, into the burner, the actual fuel I'm using. Because it's staying cool up here, despite this being full of now boiling water, my ice cream is staying frozen. NASA, that is.
100 degrees on the inside, below 0 on the outside. But it still isn't a perfect kettle.
One thing I didn't design in any way of pouring it out. That's refinement. I'll work on that.
Just like the Space Shuttle main engines don't melt. even though they should be getting really, really hot.
Even the staggering power produced by the most efficient engine in the world isn't enough on its own to get the shuttle into space.
At liftoff, the shuttle is just too heavy. Engineers needed more power, but they had to limit the weight.
It's a tricky thing to get right. To get more power, you need more engines and more fuel. More engines and more fuel means it's heavier.
So the shuttle is fitted with these boosters. These are solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, and they have a great power to weight. And as the name suggests, the fuel they burn isn't liquid, it's solid. And it's very, very explosive. The height of a 15-story building, these are the largest solid rocket boosters ever flown.
When the fuel is lit, all those elements produce about 1,300 tons, about the same as 17,000 Formula One car engines.
To get that amount of power, the fuel has to burn at incredible temperatures. The secret ingredient takes us back to tram. In the 19th century, tram tracks were just bolted to one another, and the gaps between them made for a bumpy ride. Then in the 80s, German chemist Hans Goldschmidt invented a way to weld tracks together. Goldschmidt discovered that he could create an intense heat by burning something you might not expect to burn at all: aluminium. First used in Essen, Germany, aluminium welding made for a much smoother ride and revolutionized tram lines across the world. It's the intense heat of aluminium that NASA exploits. Burning even a small amount can be hot enough not just to fuse steel, but to cut through it, which is why I have one of these.
It's an aluminium lance, made out of aluminium foil you'd find in the kitchen. Lots and lots of it rolled very tightly here into fine tubes, wrapped in yet more foil. Obviously, this is something you don't want to be trying at home in your kitchen, but you probably don't have the other ingredient you need anyway, which is compressed. That's over there in the tanks. So, oxygen flows along the pipes, along my aluminium lance, up here. I ignite it, then burns. In theory, once lit, this should burn at least 2,500 degrees C. So it should be around about half as hot as the sun.
But can my homemade lance make an impact on solid steel?
Right, only one way to find out. Enough talking, let's do it. Sometimes you can look at theories and numbers on paper, and sometimes you just need to see evidence, and I think that counts. Clearly that was pretty hot.
Aluminium provides enough heat to cut through steel and weld tram tracks together. And a vital ingredient for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters.
Of course, the SRBs aren't just full of aluminium foil. There is other stuff in there as well, although you wouldn't want to wrap your sandwiches in any of it. Ammonium perchlorate to provide oxygen for combustion. Oxide, rust, to help it burn.
It's the powdered aluminium, though, that creates super high temperatures. High temperatures turn the solid fuel into vast amounts of gas. And it's this gas that makes it move. Because when a lot of gas is forced through a narrow nozzle, you get thrust.
It's the same thing that happens when you let go of a balloon. The air inside is squeezed and shoots out this way. That's a push. There's an equal and opposite reaction, which means a push this way. So the balloon goes that way. Sorry.
The challenge for NASA was to make a rocket that much thrust as possible right at the start, when the shuttle is at its heaviest. In an attempt to find out how they do that, I've asked rocketman David Beaton to help me build my very own Great British Space Fleet of 2. And just like the shuttle's rocket boosters, we are using solid fuel made with powdered aluminium.
This is the fuel. Can I hold it?
Yeah.
It's not dangerous?
Nope.
There's the same amount of fuel in each rocket, which will burn its entire length. But the fuel with the hole down the middle should burn faster. More fuel will be on fire at once. So the rocket should fly faster right from the word go.
Because that's burning faster, the same load.
The same load, yeah.
Burning faster,
yeah.
The power is given more quickly.
This will give a real good peak of power, and as it burns out, it will also progressively increase the thrust as well. Yeah.
And will that make a visible difference?
Oh, yes.
Test
if we can.
Can we have a race?
I would think so.
So, other than the position of the ignition groove and the colour, these two rockets are identical.
I dropped this, it's bad, isn't it?
Yes. It could be bad, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to get this right, this one has a faster burning charge.
That has the faster burning motor. That's yours.
Okay. Okay. Rocket science.
That's okay. Yeah. Job done.
This is mine. Look at that one.
We'll arm the system. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
In just 10 seconds, the red rocket shoots 600 meters into the air.
I think that was clear that the red one was a lot faster.
The red rocket's fuel burns much faster, because more of the fuel is on fire at once. This means more hot gas is produced in a shorter time, which gives this rocket more thrust. The blue rocket eventually reaches roughly the same height, but it takes much longer to get there, even though it had a bit of a head start.
It was visibly quicker.
It was,
and that's just a faster burn. That's what
That's just a fast burn.
But same energy release, just
same
released
energy,
more
just released more quickly.
Got to find them now, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
NASA's shuttle engineers need maximum thrust, so they go for a better, faster burn, like the red rocket. At launch, each booster is burning fuel at the unbelievable rate of 5 tons every second. Burn for about 2 minutes. Then they're jettisoned. "49 kilometers up, they fall away from the shuttle and back to Earth. They crash land into the Atlantic Ocean. Here, and this is the beauty of the system, NASA picks them up for refueling back on dry land. So, building technique that smoothed out tram journeys, the thrust provided by the solid rocket is enough to get the shuttle off the launch pad and on a journey of its own. Hundreds of kilometers. But the rockets are so powerful that they create a very dangerous problem of their own. At liftoff, the exhaust gases that generate thrust also generate phenomenal sound energy. This is so powerful, it can have fatal consequences. And this is the launch pad where it all happens.
During a launch, this place is just alive with energy. Searing gases, incredible amounts of noise. I'm underneath where the shuttle sits on the launch pad. This is the flame trench. I can only be here because the shuttle isn't in place right now. You certainly wouldn't want to be here when the countdown hits 0. And this trench was used in some Apollo missions as well. So to think of the incredible amounts of energy that these walls have taken over the years, it kind of boggles the mind.
The firing rockets create a thunderous sound that slams into the bottom of this trench. This sound is energy. Engineer John Lorch knows how powerful this can be.
Even way back, 3 miles away, you can feel that energy just popping in your chest, you know, and it's just amazing the amount of energy. Unchecked,
all this would bounce off the ground, straight back up towards the shuttle. The vibrations would be so powerful, they would wreak havoc. On the first ever shuttle mission, heat-resistant tiles off the surface of the orbiter. That time, the orbiter returned to Earth safely, but it burnt up on re-entry.
So the engineers needed to find a way to protect the shuttle from reflected energy. To do that, they had to absorb the sound energy that roared down and then bounced back up and hit the shuttle itself.
Back at the Hammond Space Centre, UK, I can't replicate the shuttle's thunderous sound, but I can give you a taste of its destructive power.
I'm going to build a wall here and knock it over with a pulse just of air. Like that, only bigger, a lot bigger. I'll just use the half one on the end. Look, I made a neat job of that.
That's the wall built. And over here is what I hope is going to blow it over. Vortex cannon. First, we need to do a little test run.
3, 2, 1. That is the most amazing things I've ever seen.
An explosion in the base of the cannon creates a single pulse of air the shape of a donut. Unlike sound that moves in a wave, the vortex flies like a missile. The vortex has a lot of energy, but can it knock over my wall?
So Jim's now charging it with acetylene, ready to make our explosion. Don't overdo it, will you?
It'd have to be one hefty puff of air.
Thank you very much. If we're ready, everyone, in 3, 2, 1. It's just air.
Slow motion allows us to see the vortex as it travels through the air at over 320 kilometers an hour. And as you can see, it creates a fair amount of destruction. the shuttle's problem is much bigger. Its exhaust gases jet out at about 4,000 kilometers an hour, producing vast amounts of sound energy as vibrations. The engineers needed to find a way to protect the shuttle. NASA turned to a system that the shuttle to U-boats via bubbles. Acoustics expert Tim Leeton from the University of Southampton shows me how. What we have here is our very own mini sonar system. A tube of water, a speaker at the bottom that plays cheeps of sound, and at the top, a special underwater microphone that will pick them up. You can hear the sound cheeps, and they're represented on screen.
I'm going to introduce bubbles in here, because bubbles are really powerful at absorbing sound. So here we go.
So this is the key thing to watch.
That cheep is going to disappear.
All right.
So here we go.
So you're literally just blowing bubbles into it with the machine?
Yeah.
I can hear that.
But look at the screen.
It's gone.
Bubbles that you can see in the pipe are killing off that sound entirely.
We're still playing the sound cheeps through the water, but even the smallest bubbles are stopping the microphone from picking them up.
There's nothing
and it's
in
still
there
gone.
now.
We're still waiting.
Stop it.
Yep.
But there's hardly any. So these tiny, almost microscopic bubbles
killing off
sound. Killing the sound on there.
The bubbles soak up the sound by getting hot.
So literally then, the sound leaves here, which is just this wave, this movement coming up through here. When it encounters bubbles of air in the water, wave squashes the bubbles of air, that heats them up. So the energy in the sound wave is turned into energy in heat.
So bubbles absorb sound. But how does that help submarines? World War II, the German U-boat fleet is under attack. The Germans want to make their subs untraceable to the Allied destroyers and their sonars. The Allied sonar worked by sending out sound cheeps from their ships and then waiting for the echo to bounce back from a subject. This could tell them where the German subs were. If the Germans could absorb the sonar cheeps, no echo. They would be invisible. So they created rubber tiles to glue to the sides of their subs. Tiles with bubbles in them.
This is a genuine World War II training from a German submarine. And you see it's stuck onto the submarine this way. This side is smooth, but this side has holes in, has voids in.
The holes trap air, creating thousands of little bubbles.
When a sonar ping comes and hits this, these absorb the sound in the same way that those bubbles do.
So bubbles can make German U-boats invisible. But the shuttle isn't underwater, obviously. And it has a bit more than just cheeps of sound to deal with. To absorb the phenomenal noise of rocket engines, NASA turned sound absorption on its head. Instead of air in water, they put water in air. Tim's got another tube with just air in it. We're sending cheeps of sound through it. But this time we're going to try to block them with a mist of water droplet.
This one into this one,
water into ice.
OK, so pour that in there, and it makes fog. Can't really see where I'm pouring. Hopefully that's into the tube. Yeah, it's going in, isn't it? I feel like a wizard.
And my spell seems to be working.
Oh, look at that! Absolutely knocked it right back. So this is just fog. I'm not tipping the actual water in.
The microscopic droplets of water in the air are vibrating, turning the sound energy into heat. NASA protects the orbiter in pretty much the same way. Though needless to say, NASA's system is a bit complicated.
It looks like a warehouse. It's actually the mobile launcher platform. The shuttle assembly sits on top. Those three, 1, 2, 3, they're the rainbirds. And at peak flow, 9 seconds after launch, water hurtles through those at a rate of 900,000 gallons. That's 3.5 million litres a minute.
releasing so much water so quickly through the rainbirds forms millions of water droplets suspended in air. And it's these water drops that absorb the phenomenal sound energy. The system for unleashing that amount of water is unbelievably simple. A water tower.
At heart, this is essentially a really big version of the kind of water tank you'd see outside of a city.
This is really just an elegant, simple design to get that flow rate we need.
When the valves open, more than 1 million litres of water plummets. It sprays beneath the rocket engines and absorbs the thunderous sound. So, can water work against the vortex cannon?
It's good enough for the shuttle, it's good enough for my wall. First, obviously, we've got to rebuild it. Lovely.
Next, we need water.
This is our rainbird. Pretty simple setup. I'm not saying every home's got one, but essentially it's got pumps here, pumping from the lake up through those pipes and out to the top there, where a sprinkler arrangement creates basically a wall of water. So we need to get it into position. Bring it in.
The blast I'm about has exactly the same power as before. But this time, there's a curtain of water between the cannon and the blocks.
Okay, if we're ready, everybody, in 3, 2, 1.
In slow motion, you can see how the pulse of air hits the water and loses energy.
Well, look at that. I think we can safely top marks, NASA. Well done. Their theory works, as I just proved. They'll be grateful. I mean, it really did work. By using billions and billions of drops of water to disrupt the energy pulse, the NASA engineers were able to protect their precious orbiter and its payloads. And it's all thanks to the power of the bubble.
Eight and a half minutes after liftoff, the orbiter is more than 300 kilometers above the Earth. It's in space. Only minutes later, the crew is getting ready to start its mission.
The orbiter was designed, basically, to be a delivery van. A very expensive, very technologically advanced delivery van. Its job is to deliver things into space. So far, it's put satellites, telescopes, and most of the International Space Station up there.
But you can't just open the back and pull out your cargo, especially when it's likely to be a satellite, chunk of space station. Not the easiest objects to move, and quite expensive if you drop something. So every shuttle cargo bay is armed with a helping hand. Don't worry, I'm not about to be offloaded into space. This is a full-scale model back at Kennedy.
Even if the astronauts could physically lift and manhandle the cargo, spacewalking is very dangerous. So NASA turned to robots for help, specifically a robot arm called the Canadarm, built by those famous space scientists, the Canadians. They faced a real problem. How do you grab hold of something in space without actually knocking it across the galaxy? The answer was found in a camera lens. Camera lenses, just like our eyes, have irises in them that control the amount of light allowed through the lens. In a camera lens, they're made up of a series of interlocking metal plates which, when twisted, change the size of the aperture or hole in the middle. But how did this end up on the Canadarm on board the Space Shuttle?
The first designs for the Canadarm gripped objects much like a hand would. But engineers quickly realized that there was a fundamental problem. The smallest of accidental nudges could send any cargo hurtling off. There's no air resistance in space, so once something starts moving, it doesn't stop. For some reason, NASA wouldn't let me play with their $100 million arm in orbit. So, to find out just how big a problem this really is, I've asked Neil Billingham to introduce me to one of his robots.
Can I move it like that?
Yeah.
So that's forward. Ooh, it's faintly spooky.
What I'm doing is pretty much what shuttle astronauts have to do in space. And I'm beginning to get the hang of it.
See if I can scratch my nose a bit. It's annoying. It's the best thing I've ever played with. It's mega.
On Earth, the claw on the end open and close, making it a perfect tool for grabbing things.
I'll close the gripper, and then the other one will open it.
Glad I didn't do that when my nose was in it. So this claw arrangement here, clearly a very useful multi-purpose device here on Earth. How would it work in space? Well, we can find out because I've constructed here my very own satellite.
The helium does behave a bit like a weightless satellite in space. So it's very hard to grab hold of. Not just making this up. Peter Stibrani is a Canadarm expert.
Okay, so it's in position. I'm going to go for a grip. Well, that's not worked at all. That's also given it a little bit of a shove. I presume in space that would be really bad news, wouldn't it?
Certainly you could push your target away from you.
And if we were in space, that would have just kept going.
One wrong move on the real 15-meter long arm, and I could send millions of dollars worth of satellite racing out of reach. Somebody would be cross. NASA needed a new way to grab hold of things in space. One with 100% accuracy. Then one of the engineers working on the robot arm had a eureka moment. A keen photographer, his inspiration was the camera. And I have a mini version of what he helped design. Space. Like a camera iris, it rotates, but instead of interlocking plates, it has 3 wires that...
And almost straight away, I've captured what it is I'm after. I reckon... There's my space telescope. Cool. It took me seconds to do it. Why is it so much easier with that than it was with just an ordinary cab?
The initial volume that it can grab is very large. So all you have to do is make sure that your target is somewhere in there, and you don't have to do a lot of alignment.
The end of the real Canadarm is 20 centimeters in diameter.
So as long as I get it within that area, it can only possibly be gripped. Tightens it down and puts it in the right place.
And it could be at the wrong angle, it could be off, it could be backwards or forwards, and it doesn't really matter that much.
Once locked tight, astronauts can easily maneuver a chosen satellite. Since 1981, astronauts have used the Canadarm to grab the Hubble telescope, transport over 200 tons of space station into orbit, and commute in style. Thanks to a simple camera iris, Canadarm is now a vital part of all shuttle missions. But once the mission is complete, there's still the pressing problem of getting back to Earth in one piece. The return journey is one of the most dangerous parts of any shuttle mission. And it can be fatal, as every astronaut is all too aware. In 2003, orbiter Columbia burned up as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere, killing all 7 crew members. The problem is the incredible speed. At re-entry, the orbiter is travelling at 27,000 kilometres an hour.
High speeds in space are not a problem. There's no atmosphere. But start hitting trillions of tiny particles in the upper atmosphere and things change. Hitting all those particles creates friction, a lot of friction, and that generates heat. Aeroplanes, missiles and bullets are usually streamlined so they can slip through the air, creating as little friction as possible. And early scientists thought that approach would work for rockets.
But in the 1950s, space scientist Harvey Allen realised that rocket speeds come with their own problem. Travel at 5 times the speed of sound and above, and the friction is too intense. No matter how sleek the design, no known substance could survive the heat for long.
Allen's solution was, at first hearing, pretty radical. Rather than make the nose of anything needing to re-enter the atmosphere sharp and sleek, he said to make it blunt, deliberately unaerodynamic.
And that's why the orbiter's blunt nose can be connected back to a particularly unaerodynamic flying object, the cannonball. We now know a round cannonball is not the perfect flying shape, but it's not to fly. It's to smash as much of something as possible. And that's exactly what Allen thought a re-entry vehicle should do: smash the air and blast it out of the way, not try and cut through it. This was throwing the usual rules of aerodynamics out of the window. But how does smashing into air help the orbiter on re-entry?
This is the University of Manchester, but it's a very specific little corner of the university because these machines are dedicated to another very, very special machine through there. It's a wind tunnel, but these winds will be travelling at sonic speeds, up to Mach 6.
That's 6 times the speed of sound.
Now, obviously, that kind of performance involves the release and control of stupendous amounts of energy, which is why the actual wind isn't as big as some you might be used to.
So, to go inside it, I have one mini with a pointy nose and one with a blunt nose.
How do I do that?
Kostas Kontis is the head of aerospace research. First, I want to see exactly why a pointy nose design is such a bad idea for the
I guess it's got to be fairly firmly fixed.
Of course, because we don't want them to fly around during the day. It's quite dangerous.
What if this tunnel goes off while my hand's in there?
Probably you'll lose your hand.
Literally just blown away?
Of course, yes.
I don't want that to happen. Let's get this done quickly.
At these speeds, you can only see what's happening with an elaborate system of mirrors, lenses and high-speed photography.
So, if we can switch off the...
Yes. That's a lot of energy about to be released through there, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
A 6,000 kilometres an hour jet of air, to be precise.
Fire!
That was strangely... Right, well, let's get that image up and have a look. Right, so this is with a pointed nose.
That's right.
With this system, you can actually see the shockwave.
The air around the nose is compressed so much that it forms superheated shockwaves.
It actually hits the wings. So that's the tricky part, because it's quite dangerous. The temperature is very high.
So this shockwave, it punches through the air, the air goes over it.
That's right.
And it's actually, I thought that was good. Look, it's making a tiny hole, it's sleek. But where that line hits the wing,
exactly,
there's a lot of energy being deposited right
yes.
there.
The wingtips are exposed to high-speed air, so lots of friction. And at orbiter speeds, the shockwave itself reaches thousands of degrees Celsius.
So it can literally, because of the shape of its nose, it can tear its own wings off.
Exactly, yes.
And the wings are rather important. Up until re-entry, the shuttle has been a rocket. But now, it's a plane that has to glide to Earth.
So entirely counter to what we would expect. The pointy shape doesn't work.
So how will the blunt nose fare?
Fire! Okay, that's it.
Okay, lights up. Right, moment of truth. This is where we see, hopefully, some difference. Go on, then.
Okay, let's press the button.
Okay. Whoa!
You see?
Well, that couldn't be clearer, could it?
With a blunt nose, the shockwave misses the wings completely and deflects high-speed air away from the orbiter's wings. So, no friction.
And it completely counterintuitive. I would not guess that if I was sitting down to design something to re-enter the atmosphere, I would immediately think, well, pointed is best, and against everything that your kind of instinct tells me.
So, thanks to a cannonball, blunt is best for re-entry. But as is seen in this actual footage from the orbiter's cockpit, the shockwave around the craft glows intensely. At Mach 24, it's superheated to 5,500 degrees C. It might not touch the orbiter, but imagine it still makes it pretty warm. So at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, scientist Martin Wilson is in charge of producing heat-resistant tiles to protect the space vehicle.
Heat. It's very hot. So this is a kiln.
Yes, this is one of the kilns that we use in the various heat treatments of the tiles during manufacture.
And what sort of temperature is it in there?
The temperature inside the kiln is 2,200 degrees, about 1,160 degrees. And these are actually the materials from which the tiles are made.
Picked it up.
It's pure silica.
But it's just come out of there.
It just came out of there.
Seconds ago.
Still very, very hot.
Have you got special hands? Can I do that?
No, you can do that and touch it only by the corners.
That's just come out of that kiln. That's astonishing. You can still see the energy that's bouncing around inside it.
Silica cools down very fast at edges. But because the tiles are effectively a silica foam, they're also full of air. And this makes them great insulators. So, thanks to these heat-resistant tiles and cannonball, the orbiter completes re-entry and glides in for landing. It touches down at just 350 kilometers an hour.
So, after a journey of some 4 million miles at about 23 times the speed of sound, the orbiter, the final part of the shuttle, is safely here, back on Earth.
Over 3 decades, NASA's shuttle fleet has traveled over 800 million kilometers. It's taken mankind into space to orbit our world and push the frontiers of our knowledge. And it owes its engineering DNA to a church organ, a German U-boat, tram tracks, a camera, and a cannonball. This is one of the most highly machines in the world. It was born for one reason and one reason only: to race. And win.
In just a handful of seconds, an F1 car accelerates to the kinds of speeds it takes off. In fact, they're so fast that the engineers have to work hard to stop them taking off. That kind of high performance calls for titanium, carbon fibre, all those other exotic modern materials, but it also requires some surprising engineering connections.
A revolution in artillery. A new design for a jet engine.
Any second now, it's about to snap.
Oh yeah, there it goes, there, look.
That's ruined.
An ancient boat. Protective armour. And a blacksmith's forge.
Chaps, broke my sword.
An F1 car has just one purpose in life: to go as fast as possible around a circuit for roughly 300 kilometers on a Sunday. Everything you see is engineered to improve performance, to shave weight and milliseconds off a lap time. The materials, the engine, the shape.
Famously, their sophisticated aerodynamics keep it pinned to the road so well that it could drive through the Monte Carlo tunnel upside down. Well, theoretically. But the thing is, there's nothing superfluous on these machines. Nothing that isn't about making it faster, pinning it to the road, or stop quickly. That's why there's no room for luggage or a map.
The result, a thoroughbred machine that weighs about half as much as a small runabout. But it's still a car. Same things as ordinary cars, just a lot faster, a lot more expensively, and the indicators. You might think that F1 cars would be built around monstrous engines, but the engines are smaller than those in many family cars, 2.4 litres. The secret is precision, not brute force. And that precision is audible. It's the distinctive sound of components moving at speeds that would destroy an ordinary engine.
The beating heart of any car with an internal combustion engine, be it a family hack or an F1 car, is this. This is the piston in the cylinder. We've cut the cylinder away here so you can see what's happening. And it starts with an explosion from fuel up here. That's the internal combustion bit of an internal combustion engine. Those expanding gases push the piston down inside the cylinder. That does by rotating the shaft at the bottom. Firstly, it sends another piston up to the top ready for its explosion to continue the process. And that rotating shaft, ultimately, is what drives the car's wheels. You can increase the amount of power by increasing the number of these pistons in their cylinders and by increasing the RPM, the number of times a minute that the piston goes up and down and turns that shaft.
While F1 engines might share the same as an ordinary engine, a piston going up and down inside a cylinder, the engine in your road car would literally explode if it reached even half the revs that an F1 car is capable of. The heat and pressure would be too much.
This is how F1 designers engineer the solution. They get more out of each explosion up here, thanks to a huge leap forward in artillery development.
Internal combustion engines are like cannons. They both use an explosion at one end to drive something along a tube. Same process, very different effect. Just out of your bang, you must reduce something called windage. Not good for a cannon or a finely tuned engine. To find out why, I've come to a typically sophisticated and glamorous F1 learn with artillery expert Nick Hall.
So this then, which F1 technology and military artillery history come together. What do we need to make it good?
It is important to have the fit between the projectile and the cylinder. And in the early history of artillery, because you couldn't bore a cylinder very accurately and you couldn't make an absolutely reliably spherical cannonball, there had to be a gap so that the cannonball wouldn't jam, and so you lost power through that gap.
A windage gap was a safety feature to ensure that a cannonball didn't stuck in the barrel. But there was a price to pay.
So this is the gap between the projectile, cannonball, or in this case, the piston, and the cannon itself, the gap around the outside.
Yeah, that is the windage.
I've got two projectiles here, two pistons. Now, we've got one is smaller than the other. One is a little bit smaller, there's a bit of a gap. Do you reckon that sufficient difference between the size on the projectiles make a difference in how they perform?
Yes, I do, because that gap expressed all the way around is allowing a lot of pressure to escape.
So difference will make a difference in what we see when they're fired out the cannon?
Yeah.
So, first, the smaller of the two, with the slight. This should affect the performance of the cannon slightly, but will make it safer.
I've got the bigger one.
Which is probably just as well, as this is the first cannon I've built.
OK, well, let's load it up. So,
That in?
Yeah.
It's in, I'd say. Now, let's charge the cannon.
My finely machined cannon was there up to a pressure of 5 bar, or 72 pounds per square inch, which, when released, will hopefully propel the projectile down our makeshift range.
Right, our cannon is charged.
Yeah.
I'll go on 0.
So I can run.
3, 2, 1. OK, if we're ready, in. 3. I've never fired a cannon. You fired lots.
Yeah.
I'll just do it quickly. 3, 2, 1.
Released of a high-tech lever and rope assembly, the pressure forces the piston along the cylinder and into the air.
Well, it works, isn't it?
That's very good, wasn't it?
Well, that's it. That's the smaller projectile. So what we must now do is go and mark with my industrial golf flag. Look at it.
A very respectable 48 metres on our first attempt.
Right. Well, this isn't an exercise in demonstrating the effectiveness of my air cannon. Come on, it's pretty good.
It's not bad at
So
all,
that's the slightly undersized projectile piston with a slight gap in it around the cylinder bore, which we call windage. This one is now a snugger fit. So if this were too big and you had to squeeze it in, it would waste it, becoming the friction to shove it out the barrel.
Yes, but we've got very fine machining here, haven't we?
Oh, only the best. OK, so let's put... Now, that is a closer fit.
In fact, such a close fit, it may need just a little persuading. With our snugly fitting piston finally in place, the air pressure is built up to exactly the same 5 bar level as the previous attempt. There is no windage gap in this one. Safety gap on my homemade high-pressure cannon.
Right, the cannon is charged. We've persuaded the projectile into the barrel. I'm going to stand a bit further away now because I'm suddenly a bit more nervous.
No windage on this one.
No. On 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah.
OK, if we're ready. 3, 2, 1. Whoa!
Pretty convincing.
Yeah, it even sounded more dramatic at this end, and that's gone substantially further because of that tiny, tiny bit less of a gap around it.
That's right.
So exactly the same force fired it much further, and all because of a better fit.
3.
Well, we know it went further than the previous attempt at 48 metres, but by how much?
11, 12. So this got an extra 12 metres.
From 48. So
25% increased range from just that tiny, tiny extra bit that closed the gap.
Yeah. So you're not wasting that pressure and gaining range by better fit.
But I could not see the difference between the two. Barely. You could just about feel it with your fingers.
Not much more than
and this one is
thumbnail thickness.
25% more efficient, effectively. It's the same charge, same power.
Yeah.
So it's more efficient by cutting down on that windage.
Precision machining meant Gunn didn't have to allow for windage, all thanks to one John Wilkinson, known in his day as Mad Wilkinson. In the late 18th century, he developed the cannon lathe to machine cannon barrels very accurately. And Wilkinson also realised his cannon lathe could make more powerful steam engines with precisely bored cylinders. The same principle makes F1 cars faster down the straights.
So just that tiny increase in size made all the difference in this as a projectile out of my cannon. And if we think if that were working piston in an engine, firing thousands of times a minute, it would make all the difference there as well.
F1 engines are so finely tuned and the fit between piston and cylinder is so tight that you can't even start the engine when cold without damaging it, as Mike Gascoigne, an F1 director, explains.
So this engine right now is stone cold.
Yep.
And therefore, inside those cylinders, the pistons are actually
too tight. If you start
pretty
this
much attached.
Yeah, if you start this now, it won't break, but it will wear. and reduce its efficiency. So we have to plug in oil and water heaters, and we actually have them on timers overnight, such that they come on about before we get in, such that the engines are sitting there at operating temperature, and then we can turn them over.
So when you talk about tolerances, which is how closely things are engineered and made in terms of size, in this instance, then, they're so tight that until they're at the right temperature...
Yeah, they're hot home. They're actually fitted together when they're hot. So at the temperature they're going to be operating at, that's how they fit them together.
And this is why these things end up sitting there looking there like they're on life support.
Yep.
With warm water being fed to them and warmed oil to get them to operating temperature.
Exactly.
An F1 car revs to 18,000 RPM, 3 times what a normal car manages. An average car produces about 200 horsepower. An F1 car belts out 800. Mind you, it only gets 4 miles to the gallon. Its power translates into staggering straight-line speed, and that is a problem. A jumbo jet takes off at 209 kilometers an hour. An F1 car can exceed that speed 200 times during a race. Sometimes fast cars behave like planes. Manfred Winkelhock was lucky to walk away from this famous crash in Germany in 1980. It's to do with the aerodynamic shape of the car. Get it wrong and it takes off. Get it right and you will.
To an ancient, much slower and much quieter vehicle, the sailing boat. Formula One cars can keep all 4 wheels on the ground. The same principle that allows mariners to sail into the wind as F1 cars to pin the wheels to the tarmac and corner faster.
Sailing in the direction the wind is blowing is really easy. Hold up a sail and you'll be blown along. Sailing into the wind is more difficult. More than 2,000 years ago, Arabian sailors mastered the trick by changing the shape of their sails. A triangular sail was the solution because it's a kind of wing, as aerodynamicist Phil Rubini explains.
Phil, I'm kind of familiar with the concept of a wing, that it generates lift. But how is a sail in any way like a wing? They're completely different, aren't they?
Well, they look different, yes, but if you think about it, you know that a wing will fly on an aeroplane, and so to keep this wing in the air, we need a force pushing up. Force is generated from the air when it flies over the wing.
The aerofoil shape creates low pressure above the wing, and it rises. The same principle helps sailors, ancient and modern.
The Arabian sailors, 1,000 years ago, effectively invented the wing that we're using nowadays on aeroplanes. Now think of a sailing boat. The sail now looks a little bit like a wing, and as the sailing boat sails through the water, the air flows over the wing.
Like a wing, a sail creates an area of low pressure, and the boat has to move towards it, effectively sideways. Add a flat keel, and the boat goes sideways but forwards into the wind. And that sail shape helps F1. This is not an F1, but thanks to a few modifications inspired by Arabian sailors, here in one of the world's most sophisticated wind tunnels, make it behave like one. Fast cars use aerodynamics to press themselves down to make themselves seem heavier. That doesn't sound ideal, but a heavy car is less likely to take off. In this tunnel, they have sensors to weigh the car. It's about a ton now, but that should change when we unleash the small hurricane they keep here. pressing down on the down wings creates downforce.
You can see there that's the downforce that is being produced. It's a minus number because the wings are pushing the car down rather than pushing the car up.
So it's minus lift.
It's minus lift, it's pulling it down, that's right.
Aero modifications press the car into the ground, good for giving the tyres more grip and good for getting round corners. The wind blows at around 130 kilometres an hour, but engineers here can calculate what its would be at 320 kilometres an hour.
So this screen is showing the same figures if the car were running at Formula One speeds. And at those speeds, it's telling us we've now got minus 1,195
rather than lifting up. So that's some downforce. My wings would make the car a ton heavier. It wouldn't take...
It's a significant downforce now, but look at that drag figure.
It's enormous. The huge wings create huge drag, or air resistance, which would slow the car. And F1 engineers struggle to reduce drag whilst increasing downforce. My car probably would reach 100 kilometres an hour, unless I manage to fit several Formula One engines in there. It's an idea, it's not practical.
Well, a couple of things prove there, I think. Firstly, that I'm probably not going to be employed as an aerodynamicist on an F1 team anytime soon, but the theory does work. These spoilers, these upside-down wings, have the effect of pushing the car down and making it weigh, well, twice as much as it weighs normally. Thought occurs, though, because they really are just that, upside-down wings, pushing it down onto the road. All you'd have to do is turn them the other way up, and they're ordinary wings. They'd make lift. And it's not often you get a full-size wind tunnel to play with, so, guys, do us a favour, turn them over. Gotta give it a go.
Now, let's see how light we can make this car.
So this is now actually looking
That's
at
right,
rather than...
That's a positive number now, so that's showing that we've got positive lift, lifting the car up.
If we're travelling at 300 kilometres an hour, it would weigh a paltry 200 kilograms, less than a quarter of its real. So in case you were in any doubt, aerodynamics make a huge difference to how any car behaves. But you wouldn't need to tell that to Manfred. To achieve the sophisticated aerodynamics of an F1 car, you don't simply bolt on a few spoilers. Every single surface of the car is profiled to produce the sweetest combination of maximum downforce and minimum. The right answers are the difference between just finishing and winning. According to most F1 engineers, Mike Gascoigne included.
So, we all know instinctively, you think, well, make something pointy and it cuts through the air, rather than like a barn door shooting it out of the way, and that's kind of it, isn't it? I mean...
Well, no, because if you want to go in a straight line and go very quickly, that's what you do. You make it very pointy, very sleek, so you have minimum drag. But unfortunately, those cars won't go around a corner. If you want to go around a corner, you want to push down on the tyres, because the more you push down on the tyre, the more grip you'll get and the more quicker you'll be able to go around the corner. The classic thing, if you look at the grid in a Formula One race, and if you look at the car on pole and you're slower, 1.9 of that is aerodynamics, always.
An F1 engineer is pretty simple. Shave seconds off a lap time. Usually the answer is also simple. Boost power or weight. But there is another way, through driver psychology.
Making a car means thinking the unthinkable about what happens when things go sideways. Because a safe, confident driver is a faster driver.
And thanks to a jet engine, F1 cars protect their precious cargo very well. By their very nature, go very fast. And if something goes wrong, it goes wrong very fast. Amazingly, this driver also survived, because safety is now so important in motorsport. Formula One engineers have to tread the fine line, making their cars light enough to be competitive, but strong enough to be safe. This calls for material that is stiff, light and strong. A stiff, rigid car corners faster. It doesn't twist. The wheels never leave the ground. A light car accelerates and brakes more quickly. And a strong car is the driver. A nervous driver won't push the car to its limits. Finding stiff, strong, light material would be the holy grail for F1 engineers. Years ago, the aerospace wing of Rolls-Royce went out to do just that. They started work with a revolutionary new material. They used it for high-speed fan blades in their new jet engine. These had to be very light and very strong. Remind you of anything?
Aviation engineers, Formula One car designers, are always on the lookout for lighter, stronger materials. And the answer to their quest lies beyond these doors. Only it's quite special stuff, hence the need to cover up. Perhaps not surprisingly, it doesn't exactly look or sound like an industrial revolution factory in here. It's all rather clean and neat and quiet. But what they're making is capable of putting up with some rough treatment. So this carbon fibre in its raw, floppy state. And you really wouldn't think that was much use for making jet engine fans or Formula One cars, for that matter. And you'd be right, in this condition.
It needs two extra elements before it's ready: heat and pressure. Basically, you stick it in a big pressure cooker. A really big pressure cooker.
That is quite an oven door. Okay, so select gas mark 6 and wait.
The material that emerges is lightweight but incredibly tough. Tough enough to make an F1 car. All carbon fibre starts its life as string. It can be woven into cloth or straight into a high-stress component. These carbon fibre drive shafts are destined for very expensive cars and Le Mans race cars. Manufacturers and racers need to know exactly how much stress a carbon fibre drive shaft can take. And this is the world of Chris Jones, a test engineer for a leading manufacturer.
So Chris, test engineer. I'm guessing that means you get to 10 to destruction.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because that's where I think you can help me. Because I know carbon fibre is used in Formula One because it's strong.
Yeah.
But how light and strong compared to other materials? And that's where you can help.
Well, what we've got here, we've got two prop shafts here.
Right.
I don't know if you want to pick that up. And,
so this is a steel prop shaft?
Yes.
So this big lump of metal connects the air to the wheels.
That's
so
right,
all the power goes through this.
Along the car, yeah.
Right,
that's
okay.
Right. And here we've got the carbon fibre equivalent to the same thing. So if you want to pick that up and...
doesn't weigh anything at all. But, I mean, obviously, if carbon fibre is as strong, if this is as strong as the steel one, it's a no-brainer because this is so much lighter, you'd use this.
Exactly.
But can you tell me how much so? Show me how much if this is as strong as that.
I think we can do that.
What I'm asking is, can we brake?
Yeah, we can give it a shot anyway.
Okay, right.
This rig uses torque or twisting force to test materials until they break. Sensors can judge exactly how much force to cope with before snapping.
So when this is working at full tilt and at full power, how much torque?
8,000 newton meters we can put through with this rig.
It's really not the kind of device to catch a tie-in, is it?
No, not at all.
To put this in perspective, it requires around 2 Newton meters of torque to drive a corkscrew into a wine cork. This rig can produce 8,000. It's a lot of plonk.
So that piece of plastic and these glasses will be immense forces being unleashed with it.
That's the plan anyway.
Good. Okay,
so,
fine. Oof, yes. A bit further back, maybe?
Okay, you should be okay there. Right, okay, well, that's on its way up. You see the numbers are rising here.
293, that's a lot of Newton meters of torque.
You can see, if you look at this end here, you can see this end of the machine will be twisting around. It's yielding already, look. There we go.
So
that's
what's
yielding.
this showing us?
Yield there, so the machine is about to fail, so any second now it's about to snap.
Really?
So this the machine is just distorting now. You should be okay.
Necking. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, but here it means when a material gets thinner in cross-section. It's an indication it's just about to fail.
Oh, yeah, there it goes there, look, look. Oh, it's gone.
I think we'll stop that there.
That's rude.
I think it is.
You have broken that. What did it make it to?
That got to 1,376 newton meters.
1,300 newton meters. Well, it's now a corkscrew.
It is.
Yeah,
there you go then.
It certainly didn't spring back either.
No.
Did it? That is quite badly spoiled. Well, now we know for that one. Let's see what the carbon fibre equivalent can take.
Okay, shall we get that one in?
And straight away, that's a reminder of this thing is.
Lighter, but in theory, much stronger. And much more expensive. £2,500 for this shaft alone.
It certainly looks better, doesn't it?
It does. Quite attractive, aren't they?
I can't believe it's going to have any strength compared with the big steel one.
Okay, shall we see what we can do out of this one?
Right. So 1,376 is the target. If it can match that, it's matched the much heavier steel.
Yes, that's right.
Pile it on.
We're off.
So it's climbing 640, 7, 8. It doesn't hang about this machine, does it? 9, 10, 11. And we're getting close to where the steel went. 13. It's just gone straight past it. And it's
so there's no
completely blitzed.
There's no damage to the shaft there whatsoever.
So this much lighter,
much stronger.
Just gone completely howling past. What will it make it to, do you think?
I'm hoping 4.5.
4.5. 100 for the steel, and it weighs so much less. Oh, we're on the way to that. 4, 2, 3, 4. Oh, we're past. 5. I was just about to ask what happens when it goes.
That's what happens
now
when it goes.
I didn't jump. I didn't jump. So it made it to?
It made it to 4,728 newton meters.
4,728, 1,300.
steel.
And it's so much stronger than the big steel one. And let's not forget, it's just made of this stuff, isn't it? It's just threads. Basically, it's just expensive string, isn't it?
Pretty
That's
much.
it. Just that.
Thanks to a jet, strong carbon fibre is perfect for making light, which means, of course, fast cars. You make an F-car the same way you make a dress, by following a pattern. Every shape necessary for making all the component parts is precisely cut from carbon cloth. Including this, the monocoque, or single shell. It's the cockpit for the driver. This ultralight shell is also the body of the car itself. There is no internal frame. There's no need, because the carbon fibre is tough enough on its own. All that shields the driver is a skin of carbon.
But that's not the only thing that needs careful protection on these sleek beasts.
F1 cars run on pretty much the same fuel you and I get at the pumps. But petrol is petrol, and it's highly flammable. That's the point of this stuff. In races, F1 cars must now carry all their fuel from the start. 200 litres of petrol, travelling at 320 kilometres an hour. That is quite a missile. The tank has to be, or the driver could be toast. Strength usually has a weight penalty, but in the anorexic world of F1, that isn't an option. And thanks to a bulletproof vest, the cars stay safe and fast.
For their solution, the F1 designers took a bit of a swerve. Rather than build strong fuel tanks to withstand impacts, they used something that works on principles closer to the way a car's suspension works. A bit of give. Down here I have a water bottle and a rubber gym ball, both with water in them. I'm going to drop them both off here, same height, 50 metres, and then, well, we'll see the principle in action. The bottle first, I think. So it's just up and over the edge, really. Here we go. Oh, dear. That didn't work. That would be bad in a fuel tank. And now the ball. Right.
That's more like it. Now, while our 15-metre drop may not have created F1-type speeds, it does a fairly good job of replicating the type of forces a fuel tank might experience during an impact. A light, flexible material that bends and absorbs impact sounds ideal. Apparently, it's tricky to make something flexible and strong. Professor Paul Hogg is a materials expert from Manchester University.
All I've really demonstrated there, then, is, well, the solution. Why don't they just make Formula One tanks out of rubber?
OK, so it's nice, it's conformable, it'll put up with that sort of drop loading.
Yeah.
But what happens if you've got something sharp that's going to puncture it? This material is actually quite weak. Most of the things that make materials flexible tend to make them weak at the same time. So if you've got something sharp that's going to puncture that...
OK, so if it's a sharp, pointy impact, something like, let's say, an arrow.
An arrow?
Glad you said that. Because over here, Master Archer Steve Ralphs is going to fire a flaming arrow into this, which is going to be, for the purposes of this demonstration, our fuel tank. Rubber ball full of fuel. I should put it on the target, like so. Steve?
And because our rubber ball has several litres of petrol in it, and we're about to shoot it with a flaming arrow, we thought it best if we had the local fire brigade on standby. They have a lot of flaming arrow-related fires in Lancashire, apparently.
Steve, you can put a flaming arrow in there from about here.
We can but try.
OK. If you watch Formula One, you'll know this is exactly the kind of thing that can happen in a racing situation. We are flaming. Yeah. And that is why they banned crossbows at racetracks.
Whilst flaming arrows aren't usually an issue during a race, the 230-litre fuel tank in an F1 car sits in a white-hot engine and a vulnerable driver. Any spillage, and you can have a fireball.
Possibly overkill there. That didn't work at all, did it?
Didn't, no.
Clearly the rubber's just not... It's flexible.
It's just not strong enough, particularly when you've got that point loading on.
Which could well happen in an accident at a race. Not an arrow, obviously, but a piece of metal could go in. So how are we going to make something that is stable enough and strong enough?
Well, we've got a bit of a problem there. I mean, we know that things that make materials flexible tend to make them weak, and the other way around. If you want to make something very strong, it becomes very rigid. But we've got a trick we can use in materials, and we use this a lot, and that's by making things very thin. And if we make a very strong material into a fibre, it's very thin and it becomes very flexible. This is Kevlar. It's a very strong material. It's actually a very stiff material, but in a fibre form, you can see it's very, very flexible.
Kevlar is so resistant to puncture, it's become synonymous with bulletproof and armour. It was originally invented in 1965 by chemist Stephanie Kwolek. A replacement for the steel bands in tyres.
This is very strong stuff made very thin.
Yeah.
Which means it's flexible. That's brilliant, Paul.
That's all it takes. That material is about 5 to 10 times as strong as steel.
Yep, just like carbon cloth, this miracle fibre is stronger than steel, between 10 times stronger. That's why they can afford to make it so thin.
So by making something like Kevlar thin, you can make it flexible and strong,
Yes.
but that won't hold
not much use.
fuel, obviously it'll fall out.
The first thing we've got to do, we've got to turn that into some sort of fabric so that we can use the material to make a shape, but a fabric isn't going to hold the fuel in, is it? So we've got to encase that in something which is still flexible. So we take that and we combine it with the rubber, and we get...
And this is the real deal. This is an actual F1 tank. They've lent us this. It doesn't look much, but it's very, very clever. And also very expensive, thousands of pounds to make one of these. And that's combining then the properties of these two materials. So this then is stiff and strong, and it'll hold the fuel without it running out.
Yeah. So basically it's a rubber matrix reinforced with a chemical to give it the strength that you need.
Really, we should test this with another flaming arrow. I can't really...
No?
They'll be shouting. Very expensive. We've been lent it. We've got to give it back. However, I've devised something over here that might just do the job.
I have brought along the industrial cousin of the material used in the F1 tank, rubberized Kevlar.
This is the stuff. This is the Kevlar fibre inside. It's making it strong. And this is the rubber in it. And it's still
nice
flexible, but very, very strong, combining the properties of the two materials. Steve, have we got any more flaming arrows? I think we need another one.
Though it visibly deforms the rubber, the arrow can't pierce the Kevlar. The bag is never punctured. The fuel never leaks. Driver is safe. It works. Okay, it was an unusual setup, but the principles are exactly the same. The two materials working together can be flexible and strong. Most importantly, my fuel is safe in that rubber because it's quite expensive. The flexibility of the tank has an added benefit. It can be squashed to fit a tight space. And I get to enjoy the spectacle of two highly trained engineers using talcum powder to help post the crushed tank through the slot in the frame. The integrity of a stiff, strong frame would be ruined if you had to cut a big hole in it for your fuel tank.
If you need a hand at any time, just ask me. I'm here for the more technical bits, obviously.
So there you have it, F1's dirty little secret, talcum powder.
Easy.
Thanks to combat-proven body armour, F1 drivers know that the fuel just behind their head is going to stay in the right place. And the only punctures they have to worry about are in the tyres.
Tyres in F1 are not designed to last the full race distance. That means they have to be changed at least once during a race. How long does it take you to change a tyre? 15 minutes? 20? In the speed-obsessed world of F1, that wouldn't fly. Formula One mechanics can change all four wheels in less than 10 seconds. The key is having a pit crew drill with military precision and the right tools. Instead of 4 or 5 fiddly bolts, F1 wheels have one massive centre locking hub, which can be spun off with an air gun in less than a second.
Looking at
and listening to an F1 car. You might think that only serious rocket scientists and design engineer types have anything to do with actually making one. But we must not forget the vital role played by prehistoric blacksmiths, because the technique used to make this sword also helps an F1 car flash around the track.
Things that go fast tend to get hot. F1 cars are no different. Some of the hottest and most stressed parts on an F1 car are the wheels. They can rotate 150,000 a race and encase brakes that can work at temperatures of 1,000 degrees Celsius. Road cars use wheels made of steel. No good for F1. It's too heavy and too weak. So, what's the...
The material they use is this, magnesium, which has many useful properties. It's also used in this in my hand, which is, well, it's a fire-starting kit, which is a worry. And just in case you didn't believe me about this particular property of magnesium, I had to come away from the expensive F1 car to demonstrate. First, scrape some magnesium off. Next, hit it with a spark off here. One of those. And you really want that in the wheels of your car.
In rare circumstances, such as when a the wheel to scrape along the ground, magnesium rims can catch fire with dramatic effects. So why does anyone use magnesium to make wheels for racing? Same again, magnesium is strong and light. On F1 cars, light wins over the small risk of fire, and it's one that's worth taking. Magnesium is up to the stresses of rapid acceleration, high-speed cornering and braking. But to make it even stronger, the F1 engineers borrowed an ancient technique for manipulating metal. If you want to shape metal, you can just cast it, melt it and pour it into a mold. Modern smiths Mike Rosser and Craig Jones show me.
It'll still be extremely hot.
I can't undo it. I'm not manly enough. No, it's a test. I can't undo that. How?
All right, I'm not actually a blacksmith, clearly. Look at that! And that's what we just made.
One mallet. There we go.
So we just made that mallet. And it's not just simple things like hammers that can be made by casting either. More ornate objects like my sword here. See, that's cast. Really quite delicate and quite clever. Again, made by casting. Ah! Oh, Lord, I've dropped my sword. And, yeah, I think what I've done there is demonstrate perhaps a weakness. Some things are best made by processes other than casting. Fortunately, they can do that here as well. Chaps, broke my sword.
Yeah, fortunately for clumsy swordsmen and F1 wheels, there is another process which leads to a far stronger end product. The ancient technique of forging.
It's it, basically.
Basically, if we work in the edges.
Forging is the shaping of metal using localized compressive forces, or smacking lumps of metal repeatedly with a big hammer.
So this is forging. Yep.
Forging most metal aligns its internal grains, which makes it naturally strong.
Right, you'll be back in the fire now and get some more heat into it.
By contrast, in cast metal, the grains are randomly creating points of potential weakness.
I'll tell you what, while nobody's looking, do you want to just straighten it up, and then we'll cut this bit out.
After many, many back-breaking, arm-wrenching hours at the forge, my blood, sweat and tears pay off.
Oh, yeah. That's just about perfect. I did all of that. Obviously, normally it would take somebody a long time to learn how to do this. Can you go and finish mine off for me? Yeah.
With a little gentle buffing from my glamorous assistant, my sword reaches showroom condition.
Thank you very much, thank you. And straight away, my forged sword already looks a lot better than my cast one. It's lighter. Is it stronger? Yeah, clearly. That's a lot stronger than my cast one.
That's why F1 teams forged magnesium wheels.
Forging is better than casting, and that's before we even consider the weight, because this whole sword, the forged one, weighs less than just this shattered portion of my cast one.
And the same is true for wheels. A forged wheel will be lighter and stronger than a cast one. As you'd expect, F1 teams have armies of blacksmiths turning out wheels. Now, not really. The process is somewhat more industrialised. A semi-molten alloy is crushed into shape using a force of 9 tons. The grains are aligned, and you're left with some incredibly strong wheels. Just pray you don't get a puncture.
Everything about an F1 car is designed to get it from to the checkered flag as quickly as possible, and it's a spellbinder for millions of people all around the globe. But a huge chunk of that racing doesn't take place out there on the track, because the engineers compete constantly and with incredible ferocity, just a few milliseconds advantage over their competitors.
And that means being on the very cutting edge of science and engineering, discovering technologies which end up far from the race circuit, almost as far as Mars, in fact. Usually, technology trickles down from space exploration. Formula One cars turn that on its head. Yes, the high-tech plastics that went into the Beagle 2 Mars lander came thanks to Formula One cars.
And at the risk of overstretching the metaphor, like butterflies, say, even in death, considered objects of beauty and prized by collectors. And it is easy to be seduced by the stark, functional beauty of these things, by the depth of craftsmanship. But it is worth remembering they owe their very existence to some surprising engineering connections.
The first truly accurate cannon. The very first wing. A jet engine.
So any second now, it's about to snap.
Oh yeah, there it goes.
Body armour. And a blacksmith's forge.
I look menacing.
The most striking buildings in the world. In its life, its distinctive shape has made it an icon